Well, Kevin, thanks for joining me on this podcast real quick. I'm jealous of you being in Hawaii, but it looks like based off your social posts, when you first arrived to Hawaii, you couldn't really do too much.
No. State has a very strict, or it did. I think things have changed a little bit with their pre-testing program, but had a very, very strict mandatory quarantine when you arrive. And I arrived to an empty home that I released, so I didn't have anything except really my bedroll, some clothes, and like one or two books and a laptop. That was about it.
Have you been to Hawaii before, or have you been there like before this?
Oh yeah, no, I've been out here before. Last time I was out here in Oahu was for a wedding back in 2016. My old college roommate decided to come home to get married to his now wife. So it was fun. Good local wedding. Got a good local experience beyond some of the plain tourism stuff.
Right. Yeah. I only went to Hawaii one time. We did some reporting on Maui about like how bad the drug problem was happening, and like basically we got in a car with a couple of locals and filmed them, doing different kind of pills and stuff like that. And it was pretty intense. Like Hawaii is such a interesting place. Like there's a lot of stories around there actually. And I was surprised how on the main island, how we did a reporting of how there was some issues regarding brothels and younger age girls. And we actually did that whole project for, I could say, Vocative. I don't know if you remember that news site, Vocative.
Yeah.
And they never released it, but we still have like all this footage of like filming, with a hidden camera and filming, like past victims and everything. Did this whole great piece and never got released. And so, but that was my Hawaii thing.
Crime out here and corruption out here is absolutely wild. Currently, right now, there's two federal cases going on right now that are really amazing. Actually, sentencing just came down on one this month. The police chief of Honolulu is going to federal prison. I'm
not surprised.
Along with some of his guys and his wife, who was a prosecutor, and that's and after that, an associated case involved. There's a crime boss, Mike Miskey, who is now also not in prison yet, but he's in holding and with no bail. He's in prison for hiring somebody to murder, like that, and also chemical weapons attacks were alleged.
Wow.
It's wild, and it's amazing that nobody on the mainland ever hears these cases. Though granted, there's a lot going on in the news cycle right now.
Exactly.
But it's a federal case. These are federal, that involved a lot of agencies, and it is kind of wild to hear the details of it and be like, hey, wow, this is like a story that if you saw it on Law and Order, you'd think it was one of the badly written episodes, because it's just like, that would never happen.
No, yeah, we would hear stories of, and I'm waiting for, who knows, maybe Netflix is coming out with a series called Paradise Lost, and they've been working on it for a long time. But we would hear like stories of when they would have, any big event, like maybe like the Super Bowl or the MVP or the All-Star game, the NFL All-Star games, any kind of big event that would happen, you would hear different stories. And yeah, it's such an interesting, Hawaii in general is has a lot of really interesting, crazy stories there that you would just hear. But how do you like it other than the crazy stories? How is it being like, on island life?
It's not as cool as the last time I was out here. All the bars are closed. It's a place where culturally is really built around large gatherings. Big barbecues with all your friends and all your ohana, and it's just not really the way it is right now. So.
Yeah. Can you go to beaches and stuff like that, or can you do like outdoor stuff?
Yes, we can. We can now. There was a period during the lockdown this summer where beaches and trails were closed, but gyms and water parks were open. It's been weird times out here. Weird times because of how I ended up here, and weird times because of how it's the new normal. It's all strange. Everything is strange.
So, can you tell me a little bit about like your background and as a freelance journalist, and most of your work has been international affairs, I guess. I've noticed a lot of your past reporting. How I discovered you is through Black Rifle Coffee and Coffee or Die magazine. I read a lot of your articles there and really enjoyed the stories that you were doing, and following, how you got back to the US and how it, really that during that time it was getting crazy with COVID. So yeah, I just wanted to see, like, maybe start with, your background and what your current profession is. And yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It's very hard to describe my career because it's gone in a lot of directions, and some of it has been, a lot of it lately has been internationally focused, but a lot of it actually was local, some of it hyper local. And I've always just kind of had multiple things going on. My journalistic career really kind of started in college. I started writing for warisboring.com back when it was still just David Axe's blog. I don't know if you or some of your listeners might remember that. It was an interesting era. But yeah, it kind of started with that. I was in ROTC at the time. And during college, I was ultimately kind of medically disqualified from continuing a military career and continuing with ROTC. And then, at that point, I kind of had to figure out, I was like, well, what am I going to do with a history degree? But I'd already started writing for War is Boring a little bit part-time. I just kind of threw myself into student journalism out there. I did a study abroad class in Dubai. It was a communications-centric one. So went out there with journalism students and art students, and just kind of, we didn't really have a curriculum. We just kind of wandered by in our own little groups and sometimes by ourselves. So I ended up meeting a lot of people, meeting some of the Arab college students out there, talking to them about their lives, taking a lot of pictures, and it just kind of gradually went more and more in the journalism direction. It largely just, in some ways, just because I couldn't think of anything else really to do
right
myself. I had a lot of supportive faculty in the history department at my college, but the chair, because my GPA wasn't on paper very good, everybody said my work was good, but the overall grade just didn't reflect the work that I was doing. But he mostly cared about the grade, and he told me, I hope you're not thinking of going to grad school because you're not smart enough for grad. Is fine. If I'd gone to grad school, my life might have been very, very, very different.
Yeah.
So I ended up for a while. I kept writing for War is Boring, but I also got kind of hooked into. I dropped that for a bit to do some freelancing for some local McClatchy papers out in Washington State in the Tacoma area. The Puyallup Herald. I got involved in this little hyper-local community journalism project called Discover Parkland, about Parkland, Washington, which is a place that people have not heard of, but they've seen. Cops was frequently filmed out there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's
Random.
yeah. I mean, if you lived out there, you know why.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'll couch that by saying like some of my best memories are Parkland and the people who live there. But it's a place that has also just dealt with a lot, and people out there have dealt with a lot. Methamphetamine and heroin had a horrible impact on some of those areas, particularly when the industrial base in Tacoma kind of dried up. That was always a very industrial town. It's still very much a port city. But yeah, we could go on about that for a while. But I was doing that, and I mean, and most of the reporting was more just very community centric, local businesses, local artists, and it was also a lot of editing and working with students from the university who were using it basically to get some experience, do work as well. They were working for free, but they were getting course credit for it. So I was doing a lot of that. And that was around the time that I also started working for a comic shop. So I was bouncing around, working at a comic shop, doing some of that, doing some event photography. And I think it was 2013 that David Axe invited me to go back to work for him because he got a bunch of money from Medium.com. This was kind of this was after the Danger Room kind of disbanded at Wired, who used to do a lot of military coverage. Noah Chapman, who is now editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, he had been kind of in charge of that. And I think that was around the time he went off to foreign policy. I don't remember where Spencer Ackerman ran off to, but one of the editors at Wired got hired on to do content for Medium, and then he called David to say, hey, want to run our defense military coverage shop?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and David just reached back to everybody who'd ever written for War is Boring, and we moved War is Boring over to Medium. And there's a long, there's also several long stories in there. I won't get into those, largely because I also signed a bunch of NDAs that I think
good.
How some of that worked. But we were able to really do some really interesting, really inventive things. And at some point through the associations I'd made over the years, I kind of I accidentally found myself as the team coordinator, as the editor for the team that we had working in Iraq right around the time that Mosul fell.
Okay.
I've been talking to my friend Matt Chetty Roberts, who's a photographer who was working out there. He was out there before Mosul fell. He was already there. He was working on this long-term thing about unexploded ordnance in Kurdistan.
Oh, okay.
About all the mines and all the stuff that Saddam had left there. And we had been talking about having him publish some of that stuff over with us, because I thought that was interesting, and there is a lot to talk about there. And ultimately we did, because that kind of ended up intersecting with the conflict itself, because refugees coming in from Syria had to walk through these minefields. They had to walk through Saddam's minefields, and not all of them made it. But since he was on the ground already, we put him to work immediately. He was a really good photographer, but he wasn't confident as a writer. So basically he would send me his notes and I'd turn them into articles, and they'd be illustrated with his very beautiful photos. Then I got assigned a Kurdish journalist out there too, who got referred to us, and he became one of our contributors also. And I worked closely with him because he was writing as somebody their English was very much a second language.
Yeah.
The editors didn't want to just work on that, since I was already working with somebody else doing pretty much kind of the same thing, like being a ghostwriter. I worked with him too.
At that time, when you were like looking at all these photos and everything, did you like had any, like, did you want to go jump on a plane and head there? Was it, or were you just fine just writing?
Oh no, every day I wanted to go.
Yeah.
Every day. Yeah, there were so many times I wanted to go. And ultimately, that I ended up going because
Yeah, right.
I had friends over there through working on this, and they kept asking, brother, when you come, and,
Yeah.
Eventually I made my way out there. I'm trying to think of other
Yeah. No, I mean Mosul was a crazy time. I've been going to Iraq since I was in college, like 2011 to like 2010, 2011, in between there. And I was kind of I may have met your buddy at a couple of the restaurants or something like that just by crossing paths. But yeah, it was a crazy time. And there's still a lot of good stories to come out of there. I saw the Netflix Mosul documentary. I thought that was interesting. I don't know if you've seen it yet.
The documentary or the movie?
Oh, sorry. The movie. Yeah.
I haven't yet. I've heard a lot of good things about it. I do intend to see it. I wasn't there during like the main battle, but I did go out with the SWAT guys. Afterwards. So those guys are near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, it was better than I thought it was going to be. I mean, they definitely captured the urban warfare feel, like just how, like when people ask me kind of sum up some situations, I was like, well, before that, it was like, do you remember that scene in Saving Private Ryan where like the sniper scene where they're trying to like take down the German sniper and he's pinging everyone? Like that's how it at times it felt. And it was, I think some people say it was one of the largest conflicts since like a World War II when it comes to like urban warfare kind of thing. I mean, it was a lot of people. And I think you're going to start seeing more and more, stories and documentaries and films from Mosul, just because there are so many. So I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it definitely was. Though, I mean, I don't know if it's as unique in that way when you compare it to the fact that we've already seen similar things happening in Syria to like, almost every city in that country.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And we'll get to it, but like, yeah, I Mosul has been through a lot, but I was actually struck by when I was there by how quickly they bounced back. And I have to really contrast that to what I saw in Raqqa.
Oh yeah, I heard Raqqa was just like bulldozed,
devastated. And we'll get to Raqqa, but I mean, I've got a lot of admiration for the people of Raqqa, but like that city has, yeah.
Yeah. No, the Iraqi people have always done incredible job. Like you would see in the Mosul operation, certain areas of the city taken back. And like the next day you would see like makeshift shops trying to sell something, or cleaning out rubble. They always have done a really good job. Like was stories like when the U.S. was coming into Iraq, the second one, and they apparently like the Kurds had already were gearing up to do better business, do better trading and everything, open up different access. So those people, they don't wait for anything. They do a really good job of rebuilding and clearing out things. I mean, yeah, I was able to visit Mosul a couple of times after the conflict, and it was pretty crazy how fast they could rebuild pretty quickly. I mean, it's still, I mean, old city is still pretty much, I don't know how people are living there, but especially during how cold it is. Yeah.
The streets were clean though when I was there.
Yeah.
Also. But let's see, where was I in my little chronology there? But yeah, I oversaw the team. Started writing for Playboy for a while.
Cool.
And that one of my one of the more interesting things overseas was writing for Playboy in Iraq. That was.
Did you have to tell the commanders, or did you have to tell people like who you wrote for?
Yeah, so that was actually not. So that was just an article I did on our Bill's nightlife. Actually, so something that I do hope that I tried to promise myself I would do each time I've been out in the field, and whenever I get back out there, I feel like something is important to me. I am drawn to conflict and covering the conflict and covering the challenges people are going through, but I also don't want my coverage of these places and people's understanding of them to just simply be that of a backdrop where wars happen. Like,
I hear you.
It's not a Call of Duty level. These are people's homes, and a lot of the people there are really awesome. The music is awesome. The food is awesome. The art is incredible. There's so many amazing people out there, and Westerners just don't get that.
Yeah,
they don't, and they also, I think, when like even refugees who come out there, like the refugees are not like that wasn't their profession before they had whole vibrant lives before they were refugees. They're doctors and carpenters and art skilled people with whole complex lives and a lot to offer wherever they may be going. And I don't like the idea that people look at this place and it's populated entirely by terrorist warlords and sad people.
Yeah, exactly.
I just believe.
Yeah, I mean, I would go in Erbil. I would go play darts every Tuesday night. Go to a karaoke bar. Maybe go to this German bar that had pretty good margaritas. Go to barbecues. I have a lot of great friends and good times. I even had like a couple Corona beers in Mosul. This guy had some a stock of Corona beers there. And they're just normal people. They're just trying to, get through life and trying to have a family and make a living for themselves. And so I hope, what I do wish, I wish Anthony Bourdain did a episode in Iraq, for sure, in Kurdistan. I feel like he would have been like perfect to tell that story of that nightlife kind of thing. And so I think that would have been awesome if he was able to do that.
Yeah, that would have been great. It was funny. So last time I went back, people would find out that I was the guy who wrote the Playboy. So the Playboy article was online. Yeah. It made its way through Kurdish social media, and they're like, "You're the guy!" Like I love that article. And, that was nice. Because I was worried a little bit in writing that, and we had one or two people refuse to talk to us when we were working on the story because boy, that's not that's not appropriate, and we know what you're about. And but no, by and large, people thought that was really awesome after the fact. And yeah, when people would find out that I was that guy, it was just like, wow, that's so cool.
Yeah. What was so what year was this when you were going to, what year was your first time going to Iraq?
It was last year, actually.
Oh wow, okay, cool.
Yeah, it was June. Was the first time I'd ever been there.
Nice and warm.
Yeah. It was weird though, because I worked so much with my colleagues out there and read so much and done editing and seen so many pictures. I didn't feel very disoriented when I got there at all.
Yeah.
As an editor, I'd worked with that region so many times and worked so closely with people that I just, there weren't as many surprises as I think a lot of people would guess. And everything felt pretty comfortable, and a lot of stuff really was about what I expected it to be. I mean, experiencing it up close is its own different thing, but I'd already, and even some of the hairier things that happened, I'd already had experiences like losing touch with one of my reporters, and thinking, like, after I knew that there had been like an ambush nearby, and not being able to contact him for
Right.
6 days. So like all that stuff was real to me. So I just felt very prepared in most ways for most of what I saw.
Mm-hmm. So do you consider yourself a writer first, and you're a photographer, kind of hybrid? Like, why do you like using print versus like video or photos? What's your reasoning for writing for foreign affairs, this kind of coverage?
Yeah, it's just kind of the direction things went. Because actually I started out more as a photographer.
Cool.
Like a student, like as a student journalist. I had been writing for War is Boring, but like when I was involved in student media back in college, I was a photographer. My first freelance stuff was as a photographer and writer for the newspaper. I still love visual storytelling, and I think I am better as a writer than a photographer, or maybe that's just because I've ended up being called upon to do that more often. And that's just kind of the direction that I've gone. Though I've also gotten to do some comics journalism where
I was looking at that. That's cool. Did you draw those?
Oh God, I wish I was that good. No,
okay.
I am. My art style is very Rob Liefeld-esque in that I don't really know how to draw. I can't really draw feet very well, and I struggle with human anatomy. I can do things that are very stylized as stills, but I can't do sequential art. I'm just not good enough. But I do enjoy script writing and working with artists to make that happen.
That's cool.
So I can think visually, and because I am a writer, but I'm also a visual thinker. It helps if I've taken pictures I've taken while working on the story really help me think and go through the writing process. I have to kind of go back and look at something in order to visualize what I'm even writing about.
Mm-hmm. You were mentioning Raqqa. What stories were you working that you were that allowed you to go into Syria, and specifically with Raqqa, or you could talk about Syria in general?
Yeah. So this was in kind of the same reasons I was even writing about Iraq. I'd already, so even when I went out there, it was already kind of in the works that I was going to embed with U.S. forces.
Mm-hmm.
There was no time spent with U.S. forces the first time I was out there, though. But I was very interested in the fact that we still had a bunch of troops in Iraq and Syria. ISIS had been, this was summer 2019. Raqqa was seized. Hold on. When did we? And the Battle of Baghouz was kind of around winter at that time. So that was around the time that we took ISIS's last physical piece of
right.
Was the idea that things were over. But I would still see these pictures taken by DoD photographers of soldiers outside the wire, and not just operators, like standard military guys. And that was something that I was really interested in. Was this is not just a special forces war. We have 5,000 troops out there. What are they doing day to day? We have a lot of troops in Syria. Like what's the mission? They're still going out there. They're still interacting with the local people, and they're still hunting ISIS, and we're not really talking about it.
Yeah.
So going out to Syria was kind of about that. And as I was out there, kind of uncovering a little bit more about how the war definitely wasn't over, and how there was kind of. I did a piece for the Daily Beast while I was out there, that kind of detailed how this Turkish-backed activity was starting to kick up, and everybody was talking about it. You know,
and it did.
Yeah, no, and it was interesting because this article really is, when you go back and read it. I'm not going to brag about being prescient. Mostly, because I'm just quoting and talking to people about what was happening and what they believed was going to happen. Mm-hmm. There were mysterious bombings all across northeast Syria, which was ostensibly liberated, ostensibly peaceful. One of the things that was most interesting was when the SDF and some of the Kurdish guys, that there's always been a perception of an alliance between them and the Assad regime.
Right.
They do, they cooperate sometimes, but when I was there, they were that was not really the mood, and because they were telling me, actually, because when I went to Raqqa, they were dealing with this spate of bombings, and I asked them, so yeah, ISIS cells, and they're like, no, this is the regime. Which I thought was a very interesting charge, and I asked them about it, and they said, and they explained, I'm like, how do you know that? They said, well, first of all, we've caught some of the people who've been behind it, and they said so because they were basically paid by the regime to do it. They explained that, we're having these kind of low intensity bombings. They said, if it's ISIS, you get 3 bombs and a bunch of people die, and you have some small arms fire attached to it. These are just scattered bombings that seem like they're there to scare people. And that's that fits the profile of the regime doing psychological warfare to destabilize what's going out here. So the profile of regime operations was different than the profile of ISIS operations. And there was a bombing in Qamishli close to my hotel, and I was told basically the same thing. It was by this church. It was an attack against Christians, but the SDF's police, they, in Qamishli, things were a little bit different, where the regime and they have this very uneasy relationship between the regime and the SDF, because they control different parts of the city, but they have a ceasefire of sorts. But they sometimes cooperate on investigations to look for things. And, the SDF said, hey, do you need any help? And they were like, nope, we got this. Nope. Yeah. And, well, hey, what about the surveillance footage around here? There's some CCTV here. Oh, well, that was down during the bombing.
Really?
And yeah, and I talked to people out there, and yeah, the consensus on the street was that was the regime, and the idea was that they wanted to scare the Christians into supporting the regime, because that is something that they do, where they say, only the regime will protect the minorities of Syria from ISIS and the Islamists. Only we will protect the Christians. So they periodically will attack the Christians to remind them that they're unsafe.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess on that, I can't definitively prove that, but the case that everybody I talked to was pretty compelling, because it was a pretty weak bombing. There's several were injured, nobody died. Everybody said if it had been ISIS, they'd be dead. Yeah. Actual jihadists, it would have been a real bomb. These little bombs are something else.
So I've never actually embedded with U.S. forces. I would see them around, hang out. I have a lot of buddies who were soldiers, and most of my embed were Iraqi forces, Pesh, or any local military unit. Most of them trained by U.S. forces. And so I was curious, when you were with U.S. forces, is their mentality I'm just do my job and get home, or do they care about, their mission? Because with local forces, you can easily tell, they're passionate. They're trying to, this is their home. This is what they're trying to do. So you get that sense of okay, yeah, I know why they're fighting. And with the U.S., I'm curious, what the U.S. soldiers' mentality, if it's still very much of they have a job, each day has their job, their mission, and everything. So I was just curious, kind of what you saw and felt.
Right. answer that is complicated.
Yeah.
Because I think the easiest way to answer that is that every Americans are very individualistic, and I would say that you know, every American soldier or Marine that I met out there had their own story, and they had their own reason for. Well, I mean, they were there because they were deployed there, but everybody had their own reason for being in the military. You had your mix of true believers. You had your mix of people who were cynical, and it was also interesting to see the generation gap of the because there were the people who had been in and who, like, a lot of them, like, had never been to Iraq, or had watched the Iraq War on TV when they were children, like young. You know, I'm 32. I'm by no means old, but, you know, I was, you know, I
remember it. Yeah, I'm 31, and I remember watching the TV, you know, as they were going in. Like, I remember that famous live coverage of just a wide shot of Baghdad, the city of Baghdad, with bombs going off and sirens.
Yeah. No, but, you know, going out there, because it was interesting. To give you a perspective on, like, some of these younger guys, because I'm out there with some people who were like 18 to 25, some of the younger guys. Before we went on a patrol out in Anbar when I was with the Marines, they were watching Generation Kill, and one of them said, like, yeah, you know, like, wow, they had the same equipment as we did way back in 1991. Oh no, dude, guys, this is a different. This wasn't that one. This was, you know, like, but, you know, I mean, I can't get mad at them because we've done a bad job of sometimes having conversations with people about these wars, and I'll get it, and maybe we'll get into my very strong opinions about that. Mm-hmm. But it was real interesting because, you know, and there was also, I was embedded with U.S. forces in November 2019 and also in March. So pre and post Soleimani, the mood was very different. Though, because, okay, let me think of the timeline. Because it was interesting to see these things kind of collide in a very violent, very insane way. Because when I was out there over the summer in 2019, last year, that was actually when like two things happened while I was there. One, the Iraqi government passed legislation that said the Popular Mobilization Forces were now officially part of the Iraqi security forces. So that happened while I was there. Another thing that happened while I was there were these mysterious ammo dump explosions at some of these PMF facilities, which were later revealed to be Israeli drone strikes. Mm-hmm. But, you know, regardless of who actually did it, they said that they were going to retaliate against the Americans for it, because that was who was nearby for them to attack. So the unit that I was deploying with, I think I already had the understanding that maybe things were going to be a little bit different than they were preparing for. Like they were preparing for what was basically just kind of a mopping up, you know, ISIS lost. We're here to hold down the fort. It'll probably be a pretty slow deployment, really. And, you know, the idea was we were going to cover just a regular infantry brigade who's doing normal things, and the 2019 to 2020 deployment was anything but normal. You know, they were there for the invasion of Syria. They were there for, and when I showed up, I showed up as they were starting to get hit by these rockets, by, like, after
Soleimani was assassinated, and then that's when.
Well, no, this was before. So this was before that.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. Those attacks,
This leads up to why that happened.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, they were getting hit periodically with rocket fire. Nobody was getting hit, but it was becoming an issue, and they were nervous, and also they were having these kind of confrontations out when they were going outside the wire.
Yeah, and Baghdad was having protests, and they were getting closer and closer to the green zone, and then they had that green zone incident. Yeah, okay. Now I remember. Yeah. American
forces ultimately figured out pretty quickly, though, that, I mean, they were nervous about. they were nervous about the protests bringing things out of control, but they realized that they weren't the target of the protests. And it was real interesting because when I was in Mosul, and there were several guys who had been there before, like some of the older guys had really interesting perspectives on it. Because one of the things that some of them really, and the mood kind of changed when I got back, but there were people saying, hey, Iraq doesn't seem that bad right now. Like last time I was here, I would have never imagined it looking like this. Like even like, we saw the terrible bombing, but even so, like they're rebuilding quickly. They're doing these things. One of them kind of said, one of the platoon sergeants I met, he said, this is, in some ways, I think that I'm glad that we're doing it the way that we're doing it. Like, it's weird that we have to ask the Iraqis permission anytime we go anywhere.
Yeah.
But he's like, but it's their country. And honestly, he said, back in the day, we always used to be spending all the money on all this garbage cleanup and all that stuff, and it would never get done because corruption would take it away, or people would be afraid to work for the Americans. But now that we've stepped out of it, they're rebuilding it. They're doing a lot of this stuff on their own. And, that's what I want to see. I want to see them doing well. And the same guy, I talked to him, like he said, and like seeing the protest, he's like, that's awesome. I think the protests are awesome because democracy is about that. And, what ostensibly we're here so that these people can have rights.
Right.
Right to this. I talked to a guy also who said, we've been talking to some of our Iraqi counterparts, and they were showing him like pictures of like their girlfriends down in Baghdad doing the protests. So there was a lot of sympathy within the Iraqi army for the protesters. Mm-hmm. Just a lot of really complicated things going on simultaneously. And you had the American forces had a lot of different perspectives. There were commanders I would talk to were like, this is, things are doing good. Hopefully that means we can leave real soon because like I don't want to come back here again. Yeah. Or certainly not like this. But then there were others who were like, like this is good. I really hope we don't leave like we did the last time. Wow. And you just had such a range of people and their thoughts on it.
Yeah.
And what
is like I saw like during the Mosul, there was a couple of times I was in some intense fighting, and the PMF were there. Like they did a lot of fighting against ISIS, and you would see Hezbollah flags. You would see. I met a group of Shia Saudis that came down, which I was like, I didn't even know there were Shia Saudis, but they're from this one specific area, and they all spoke perfect English.
Bin Laden's mom was a Shia.
Yeah, okay. So like they all spoke perfect English. This was this was early in the Mosul operation where they were just taking suburbs of it, even though so many people were like, I'm in Mosul. It's like, no, you're not. You're like 40 minutes away from Mosul. It's like a suburb. And like you would see so many Shia foreign fighters. And so I was curious, like when I was looking at the protests in Baghdad while you're there and seeing it's like, is it a Shia thing? Is it Iranian influence? Is it more of a PMF organization that people don't like? Because there are normal Shia people,
Sure.
And
well, and that I think was even really complicated too.
It's really hard.
That's and so I'm going to try to parse something here that it's. And you also just I know no matter what I'm gonna make somebody I know mad.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I think all the Western think tanks got the PMF wrong, all of them. Because one of the things is like there was a downplaying of the Iranian influence, which was clearly wrong. Like the idea that they weren't controlled by Iran, but like that's also complicated because not all of them were. Because I think that's one of the things about the PMF is it was a loose collection of unregulated militias that sprung out of overnight. So there's a lot of different people involved, and there were Sunni PMF, there were Christian PMF, there still are those groups. Some of them controlled by Iran, some of them like they have fought against each other.
Yeah.
And so that was something that I learned about later. Like even so, the initial when the Americans first started striking back against Kataib Hezbollah after K1 got bombed and killed that interpreter who was out there.
Yeah, right.
And I went to that base too and just had really interesting conversations with the people who were there when that base got attacked, because they got hit with that base got hit with 30 rockets. That's a lot. But let's see, where was it? Right, the PMF.
Yeah.
I had this conversation with a lot of the American commanders, and even the Iraqis would say this, and they're like, this is hard because we're in this, but like the fact is, a lot of these young men are heroes. They are. A lot of them were very brave. They saved Amerli from being wiped out by ISIS. That like these things happened, but these other things also happened. So like are a lot of the PMF marauders and thieves and rapists? Absolutely. Are a lot of them young patriotic people who fought bravely against ISIS? Also, yes.
Yep.
That's real hard to deal with. And there was going down to like when I was in Anbar, there were a few different PMF factions on the base. Kataib Hezbollah was one of them. Yeah,
in Anbar.
There was usually some PMF around most of the places that I was at.
I guess that makes sense, because you can get from Baghdad and stuff like that.
And the commanders would always say, like, some of these factions we actually have very good relations with.
Yeah, right.
And some of them not. They were in a weird spot, and because this was prior to them actually shooting at Kataib Hezbollah, there was this weird thing where they were the 35th Brigade, I believe, 35th or 45th, I don't remember, but like the 45th or 35th Brigade of the PMF, but they were also designated by the State Department as a terrorist group. So they were part of the Iraqi government as a result of an executive order signed over the summer, but they were also that. That put them in just a very weird position. We went on patrol. We drove by some of those guys. It's like, that's a terrorist group. They've been shooting at our business, to our neighbors, and we don't want to start that, because like if we got into firefights with them in the middle of this while we're right next to each other, that's not good for either of us.
No, you don't want to do that. They have influence in a lot of areas, and that's such a good point. There's so many different groups within a group, and they all have friends on either side, and a lot of them are just trying to do what's best for their country and trying to figure it out themselves. Iraq is such a complicated conversation. Is like, when I get back home and people ask me, like, what's Iraq like? I'm like, fuck, man, I don't know. Like,
pull up a chair. This is going to take a bit. Bringing it back to, so actually the point that this was something that I learned later. When I mentioned the first striking back against the Hezbollah guys, one of the targets was a training camp where they were training their trainees, and we killed some of them. Some of the people that we killed at the training camp, they were training for Kataib Hezbollah, but they joined for the money. They had actually just before that been protesting. They'd been at the protests, but they were like, we need money, and we're gonna join KH because the Iraqi army paychecks go missing. That's one reason also why a lot of people joined the PMF for a while, because the PMF's checks didn't bounce. They were, regardless of what you want to say, I think it's become very corrupt since then, but they were seen as being less corrupt. Literally, people deserted the Iraqi army to go fight with them because they didn't trust their commanders. And some of them would say, like, hey, some of these commanders are nuts, but they're telling me the truth. I expect that, like, we're marching forward. We're not retreating. We're fighting the battle that we wanted to fight, regardless of whether if I believe in everything this group stands for. What I do stand for is driving ISIS out of my country. And so far the army hasn't been able to do that. and late. I mean, I would ultimately say that lasted for a while. I think ICTS and the Golden Division and all that played a bigger role than the PMF in actually moving the front line forward. So,
right.
And again, these are those complicated things. There's a lot of things that seem contradictory, but it's all true.
Yeah, exactly. You will like this one part then in Mosul. I won't spoil it for you, but they do kind of bring up the conversation of the PMF in Iran in Mosul. And so when you watch it, I'll be curious you should message me what you think of it. And so it's actually better than I thought. Obviously they can't cover the full, but it's like, okay, they kind of hint at it,
Right. I'm aware that happens. I don't know all the details, but I did hear that the RGC does make a cameo.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. So like in Syria, going back to Syria, did you see very many Russian outposts, Russian soldiers, like Russian anything while you were around there?
I never saw the Russians. I mean, first time I was out there, the Russians weren't in that area at all yet. Mm-hmm. I did the second time I was out there to see the regime, though.
Okay, and they're probably not far behind. Yeah.
Yeah, I knew that the Russians had been around there, but no, we went to front line around Tal Tamir, and when we were there, it was regime and the Syriac Military Council holding the line around there. And it was interesting talking to them about it. And it was funny because I talked to a guy who had been out there around the same time we were. He went to Kobani and he said, like, yeah, the SDF and the regime guys were actually getting along pretty well out there.
Yeah.
And really, that's not what I saw. Not where I was, because it was interesting there because they were very separate.
Interesting.
Other regime soldiers. They had the Ba'athist flag up, and so there were the areas that had that flag, and there were the places that had the Syriac Military Council flag. And I asked the Syriac Military Council guys, like, hey, what's your relationship with the regime like? And they're like, our commanders handle that. We don't interact with them. Mm-hmm. Right, because I could see regime soldiers from wherever we were standing. Like we were that close to them, and they were like, we don't interact.
Yeah.
We got to fight together. We fight together. But I mean, I didn't like say the words "we're not friends," but it was clear what they meant. Because again, different places, different factions have different takes on it. But it was very clear that out there, and I talked to some of the locals. Some of the locals said, like particularly the Kurds were more like, if the choice is regime or eradication, we pick the regime.
Yeah.
But the regime was clearly like a fifth choice.
Yeah.
It wasn't what they were eager for, but it was, and also it was. I'd been worried about running into the regime out there because I'm not supposed to be out there according to the regime.
Yeah.
But during that campaign in particular, that wasn't an issue. And I talked to several journalists who had been out there already who had been scared and were worried, that the regime was going to go after them. But they weren't, mostly because they didn't want to have an incident where they were going after Western press. They were kind of actually show off that they were helping protect the area. But also when I saw them, the ones that they sent, I mean, and this has just been true of the Syrian army for a while, they're children, they're conscripts. All their hardened soldiers
are young,
their hardened soldiers are in elite units or they're dead. And so much of the Syrian army itself actually deserted to become the Free Syrian Army.
Yeah.
Like, forget that was what a lot of them were soldiers who deserted and switched sides. That's why they had to call in Hezbollah to suppress the revolution, because the revolution got a bunch of guns and experienced soldiers, and they needed outside help in order to make that happen, in order to survive. But yeah, by the time I got there, they were kids, and they were being. And I remember that Ali, my fixer, had mentioned, they treat them like sheep, but they were actually literally moved around in cattle trucks, which was just so on the nose. Just these child soldiers being hauled around in cattle trucks and being thrown at thrown in the army.
Yeah. So I always try on this part when I talk to freelance journalists is talk about the fixers and the local people that you work with, because at least from my experience, I wouldn't be able to do anything without good local trustworthy people. What was like your experience working with fixers in country and local translators? And you can either talk about Iraq or Syria, just, the local people.
No, I'll talk about both. I've been very lucky and who I've worked with. I've always worked with people who were willing to cut me a break and work on a discount. This is a freelancer, you kind of need that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, and also again, like, I was lucky because I knew Kurds from before I got there. So like the reporter who I used to be an editor for, his brother was a fixer for me a few times on the Iraqi side, going to the refugee camps and going out with the Pesh. Like I would work with him and he would work for cheap. And he would work even cheaper than normal because he felt like his English wasn't good enough, which wasn't true. He just was very shy.
Yeah, they always say that.
Yeah, his English is good, but he's somebody who is painfully shy. I think not just in English, but I think I get the impression that he's a little bit like that with everybody else too, even in his native language. But a phenomenal person who I like that family a lot because I also got to go hiking. I got to go to Veger's home village up. I don't know. You've been up in the mountains around Dohuk?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Like have you been to Derelict before?
I may have crossed. I mean, I went all around like during the Sinjar operation. I was going through all the different mountains, kind of got close to the Iranian border back when you had to like go. And this was like before any U.S. operation. Sinjar Mountain, like Sinjar City was still completely taken over. And so I'm pretty sure I drove, or I didn't drive, but my fixer did, all through those mountainous areas. I can't remember, but I'm trying to remember. There was this mountainous area past Hook that was beautiful. I mean, they have some beautiful mountains and waters and hiking trails and stuff like that out there.
Yeah, Derelict, there's a really, really beautiful river going through, and it just has this turquoise water because of the sediment or something. I don't really know. I'm not a geologist or
right.
I can't
Yeah,
the way that it does, but it's easily one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
I've definitely never been there. I've never done anything. I've always wanted to. I am planning for in the spring to go on a hiking backpack trip that my friends always go every year, and I think it's part of that stream because I saw photos of last time and it looks like crystal clear blue, like a turquoise water, like you mentioned. And I was like, I want to go on this trip next year. So.
It's probably, and yeah, no, it's beautiful. It's amazing. So yeah, I like I said, and I was going to write something about up there and there, because it was kind of bitching me like, you should write about how this place should be a tourist destination and how we're trying to make it one. Unfortunately, that's where all the PKK KDP stuff is going on, right?
I know. Yeah.
And it breaks my heart because we don't have time for that. They don't.
Yeah.
And the people there don't have time for it. That we won't dwell on that. But anyway, back.
Yeah, that's a whole. If you want to hear it, go listen to Popular Front. I'm sure Jake has done some kind of report on it.
Not yet, but that's going to be a topic coming up soon. But yeah, I had phenomenal experiences with the people that I worked with out there, either through colleagues or I listened to one of them. I'll talk later. I think I know at least one fixer that you know.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I had great experiences. I actually going into Syria, I had an interesting experience with the fixer who I still talk to a bunch. I love him to death, and I love his family. I actually had originally a different fixer lined up. who had been referred to me by a Kurd who I knew and trusted. He's like, you should link up with my friend. He's a good man. He's honorable and he's well connected. He'd be a good person for you to work with out there. So his pregnant wife got sick, and that's kind of a big deal out there.
Yeah.
And also he was a doctor, so he knew what level sick his wife was, and he's like, I can't. And that's fine. He's like, I'm gonna refer you to my friend. I'm like, oh, good, friend of a friend of a friend. in a place where you really can't really gamble on all of that.
Yeah.
But I did it. I went ahead. I trusted the guy also because he gave me a good discount. He was awesome. We clashed a few times as we were kind of getting to know each other, for sure. But he was great. It was hold on. What was it? My first actually, when I first met him, when we crossed the border, I crossed the border with two Norwegian journalists. I wasn't with them; they just happened to be crossing the border at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And that border there is just an experience in and of itself because it's manned, the Asaish of either side. So you have two imaginary governments. That's not fair, but you know what I mean. Like, neither side is they're border guards of two non-countries on either side of this border.
It's like a bigger, more organized mafias a lot of times. Sometimes.
But you had the YPGs basically. Their guys on the Syria side, and you had some Peshmerga and some it was sort of these two kind of paramilitary, sort of military forces. Military, but I won't harp on that again. It was very strange to give passports to people who represent non-internationally recognized entities to go in there, which also meant that I was kind of really there illegally.
Mm-hmm.
It was very odd in that way. But when we crossed over, there was a conference in Rojava on ISIS. And actually, like a few people who I'd worked with War is Boring, it was weird being, because it became just a random thing. I kept running into War is Boring people that I'd worked with as an editor who were just all there. So it was fun, cross paths with all these people who I'd known for years, who all just were in the region at the time. Either were traveling out for that conference or were already in the region. But because I remember this vividly, and sorry, this is rambly, but
go for it.
Yeah, the Norwegian lady who was an author, the other guy was super cool. He worked with one of the newspapers in Norway, and it was a long time correspondent in the Middle East. And they were traveling together and sharing a fixer, but there was something went wrong, and we didn't get our bags, and that kind of thing happens when we crossed the border in the bus. And I was worried about it. Obviously you're worried when something like that happens, mm-hmm. especially in a place like that. That's my body armor. That's all my thing. That was expensive, and my laptop's in there. And you guys still kind of have my passport and stuff. But I think I got my passport back at that point. But her fixer had gone out with the other guy to go take care of the bags. He was going to handle that. Their fixer and my fixer who knew each other. We're just handling the different parts of it to get us through the process. This lady looked at him and just why don't you go out there and check on that? He's like, well, I'm handling the thing in here. And she said, and she looked at him and just said, do your job. And it was she was treating my fixer like a bellhop, which, by the way, you shouldn't treat your bellhop like that either.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just don't treat your bellhop or your server or anybody like that. Don't treat anybody like that. But I remember looking at that, what are you? And we, me and him looked at each other. And that was when, he first, I demonstrated to him, at that moment, I recognize what an asshole looks like, and that's not me. I'm not, we're not going to have that. We drove away, and he was like, what was that? Like, who does this lady think she is?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's you can tell a lot out there. Like I worked with so many great people, but out in the field, you sometimes see people who just suck.
The suck. Yeah.
There's respondents who suck, and there was another guy when I went back to. There was this French journalist that we kept running into. He kept getting really mad when we were in the same spot because he was like being competitive. It's like, we work in different language markets. We're not competing. We could actually probably cooperate.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of journalists do that. Like a lot of friends I've had who like an English, somebody working in the English market and somebody working in the French market deciding to share a fixer so that they can pay less and get stories together. Pooling is a good idea. I don't understand why anybody. I only met a
few journalists that were assholes, and it was like most of the people that I got mad at were like these NGOs that just came out of nowhere, and they would wear like vest in an area where like it was taken back. It was like liberated from ISIS, a year ago, and they're wearing vests, and we're working near Mosul. And I'm like, you're 40 miles away, from Mosul, and they're posting all this. It's like, the biggest one was like they would go into a refugee or IDP camp in Erbil and saying, we're working with IDPs fleeing from Mosul. And I'm like, they fled from Mosul in 2014. Like, you're right. A lot of these people are not, and they were doing this like in 2017 is what they were saying, like making it seem like people were fleeing actively in 2017, where most of those people fled in 2014, where ISIS was doing its, blitzkrieg. So like the NGO world, which I hope maybe one day I'll do a documentary about it. Like during times of crisis, the NGO sector can sometimes, there's a lot of good help, in a lot of ways. And I'm sure a lot of those have done help, giving food, money, education, something. But the marketing and the advertisement of it just, that's what drove me insane. So.
Oh yeah. I definitely had my own experiences with the NGO. I mean, I met a lot of great people, and like some of them were very helpful and like helping us get into refugee camps to talk. Like, there's a lot of people out there who I really admire. And also I've crossed paths with some of the more controversial ones. Like I've met Dave Eubanks and the Free Burma Rangers.
Yeah, I know Dave.
Yeah. I've never. Yeah, I wish that I'd had the opportunity to write more about them. And there was something I was going to do that was. I didn't want to make it overly laudatory. I was working on a piece at one point that'll never see the light of day, just because nobody was interested in publishing it, about not just Dave but also other NGOs and like aid types who go into conflict zones strapped, and whether that's right.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of arguments for or against. Yeah. I'll still say, I think there's a lot you can say about the Free Burma Rangers, and I'm not going to say that I'm on or not on their side. But I'll say this: when I was in Syria most recently, Syrians had thoughts about the Free Burma Rangers.
There's a reason why they left Mosul the time that they did. Yeah. I mean,
the thought that Syrians had was that they're heroes. They will genuinely, and that's another thing. Like, Dave Eubanks sometimes has a pistol, sometimes not. Sometimes these guys have guns, but they will patch up anyone.
Yep. And I mean, as far as the locals goes, I never heard one bad thing from a local about them.
No, they never have. That's. So one of them died shortly before
the Turkish they think it was like a Turkish drone strike or something like that.
They did. I saw. I mean, you've seen Shahid.
Yeah.
Before. His face was a Shahid portrait. So he was a martyr. He was a martyr to the people of that area, and I saw his face several places. They had it on the border
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, like, well, because this was fresh. Like this had happened just a few weeks ago. He had been killed when we went out there. But yeah, like people in the region felt that. They felt, and he wasn't even a Westerner. He was one of the Burma.
Yeah, Burma.
He was from Burma. He was, I think, a Karen or a Kachin tribesman. I don't remember which part of Burma he was from. But yeah, that was something that they genuinely felt, and it meant a lot to them that he came all the way across the world to die at that time and in that place, because he was somebody who absolutely didn't have to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this about Dave, and we can talk about, like, I'd never heard really anything bad who's a local about Dave. I think they do amazing work. I don't agree with all their philosophies with it, but I think they do more good than bad. My only thing with Dave was, like, during the Mosul, like, he may have put other people in harm's danger, you know, like regarding the local people trying to help him out. That was like the only thing that I would, you know, is like the local people, like they're going to have to get you back, you know, if you get pinned down or something like that. And some of those people could die. So that was some of the things, but I you know, I never heard anything, and people love him, you know. And so it was not so much of like, their marketing is pretty spot on. Like they tell it how it is. It's the over dramatic marketing stuff. Some of these nonprofits that say we're working in Mosul, and I'm like, no, you're not. I know you're not. Like you're just not. And so,
well, also I think for me, and I knew this about them, but I think also just how quickly all of them ran when things got tough in Syria, because that's the other reason why everybody there loved Dave. Like he ran toward the danger when everybody else ran away. And again, there's also there's a long conversation about how that creates maybe unreasonable expectations of some aid workers. That, like it creates norms that are like the article that I would have written would have had a very nuanced take on all of this, because I talked to people who were critical of this approach, who I thought had very reasonable reasons for feeling that way. But there really were, and because it wasn't just Dave, because there were also, it was interesting to talk to people who were in the aid community who secretly were very pro Dave.
Yeah,
because you know, in general, his approach is frowned upon. And again, these are also people who said, like, you know, I don't necessarily.
Oh yeah, people agree. Like Oxfam or Save the Children or UN. There's no way they agree with Dave.
Yeah, and a lot of them would say, like, you know, I don't agree with everything they're doing, but all of them, like, a lot of the people who out there who really do care will say, like, I don't ever doubt for a second that that those people 100% care about the people that they're trying to help, and that they mean exactly what they say. There's no lie in anything that they're doing. And yeah, I talked to, there's an Irish aid worker that I talked to, and he'd been a medic out there. He had volunteered actually with the Kurdish Red Crescent.
Oh, cool.
So he'd been working with them. He was trained as a paramedic, and he went out there and was working with them during the Battle of Raqqa and all that kind of thing. So he'd been out there too. So he saw the Free Burma Rangers while he was out there, and he worked with the YPG also. And he said, you know, like, yeah, Dave is insane. But like, like I can't tell you that I don't respect him. But yeah, it was really, it was interesting sometimes to hear, like, the aid workers don't have to run into the front line, but it was interesting to hear the ones who justified just completely leaving altogether. They're like, well, you know, you can't work in an environment like that. It's like, well, then why do you even exist? Like what were you here for? Yeah. Like, if you weren't here for that, like, you know, it had, like, this place has to be, like, a place has to be stable to deserve.
Yeah, I know. What do you think is going to happen? Yeah.
Like, you know, like, do you, like, are you here to, like, are you there to help, or are you there to feel important on your terms? Because no, yeah, this place isn't always going to subscribe to your terms.
Yeah.
It's wild that anyway, I'm not going to go on and on and on about that forever.
Well, I wanted to, like, talk about just like the state of journalism a little bit, mostly on foreign affairs stuff. We could start off by like some of these new news agencies. No, I wouldn't call them news agency. Like Coffee or Die is not like a traditional news agency. Popular Front is also doing some cool stuff. You're starting to see a little bit more different ways of content that's focusing a little bit on international affairs. And so just kind of wanted your take on just, coming back. We didn't even touch on how you got back during the whole COVID thing, but writing. Yeah.
We can still do that. I got nothing else going on.
Oh, evening. Awesome. Okay, cool. Well,
yeah, we can go long. I got no problem doing it.
Awesome. Well, I guess let's talk about just like your freelance experience writing, being overseas, working with editors. You were working with a whole bunch of different news people. And so what's your take on, pitching stories and everything, your time, really freelancing while you were overseas?
Yeah. It sucks. Yeah. We got I had a great experience. One thing that I'll just be candidly honest about, I a lot of times I didn't get paid enough to really turn a profit, or even so working in Syria, I got stiffed actually by one of the organizations that I worked with when I was out there. I got stiffed badly.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to make a big thing of who it is, but to put it into perspective, Playboy gave me $5,000 to dick around in Erbil and do that nightlife story. The money that I made from that basically covered the
all
cost
your expenses. Yeah.
And
Erbil in Iraq, they're not cheap places. Like, it's not like people don't realize, like, going, first of all, some of the audience that listen, like, going to these countries and doing this kind of stuff is expensive.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, it's more expensive than even going to like Mexico or doing like a vacation. Like, you're paying something every single day almost when you're doing this kind of stuff.
Though it depends for different people. I also knew freelancers who had been out there in the region for a while and spoke some of the languages, and they didn't always do that every day. Like people who live there sometimes.
Oh, okay.
Because rent is cheap in Erbil.
Right. Food is cheap.
Depending if you know where to look, it is. Because it's funny because I have a friend who lives out there. He's a Westerner, and he had a 2-story house that like in America would be like a palace. Because actually, like what people also don't know is like some of the places out there are super nice.
Mm-hmm.
And he was paying $600 a month for it.
Yeah,
which was at the time what I was paying for rent in Tacoma, and I did not have that much space a month. And I had roommates. It's when you're working with fixers and when you're doing some of this stuff, it can be expensive. Where was I going? Oh, yeah.
But you were saying like working with editors. So Playboy they gave you a great budget. You were able to at least cover most of it. Yeah.
And I'll just say one or two more things actually about Playboy. They were one of the best companies that I have worked with. And I was a contributor there. I did the math today actually.
Tilt your camera a little bit up. A little bit.
Oh,
no, you're good.
I might move it around a little bit, but they always paid me pretty fairly. Particularly if it was in print, I would always get a lot more, and that was one of the articles that ended up in print. But their editors were always great to work with. They weren't foreign affairs people, but they were relatively educated and watched the news, and they were curious. Is
that's always a good thing.
In some ways, I preferred working with them.
Yeah.
Sometimes some of the foreign affairs. I mean, there's a lot of really good foreign affairs editors, but they were willing to look at things in a little bit of a different way every once in a while, and they would also, sometimes people have. They're right that they have expertise, but they weren't there at that particular moment. Like, I've been there before, so I know what happened. Like, well, no, it wasn't quite. They were always very good at, like, if you didn't like an edit or didn't like a suggestion that they had, you could tell them, like, we shouldn't do that, and this is why. And they would listen to you, which it was funny. Alex Holland, the photographer that I was working with on that nightlife story, who they actually found and commissioned her. She had never worked with Playboy before, and was actually like surprised. And at first, she was getting like, "I'm not going to do this." And then she saw the rates they were offering. She was like, "I'm absolutely going to do."
Yes.
And I remember she reached out because she's like, what is Playboy like to work with? I've never actually read it. I just know naked pictures, and I don't know how I feel about all of that, but I told her I had a great experience. And I remember she sent the editors sent her something. She was looking on the phone, and she's like, I don't like this headline. I don't like the way that this is framed. And I hadn't seen it yet because it was like a new thing on our contract as we were working through it. I'm like, tell them that. Just if you're uncomfortable, because there was something about like da-da-da in a war zone, and or Bill's not a war zone.
Yeah.
It wasn't. And she's like, and because and that was also why we were doing that story, was to demonstrate that it's not all war all the time, and that people have full vibrant lives. And she's like, I don't like this. I'm uncomfortable with this. I don't want to be categorized that way. I'm like, just tell them. And she told me like the next day, like, they sent an email back and they listen. That never happens.
Never.
Editors never listen, but they do. But I working with a lot of different, I think we're in a bad place in a lot of ways. Because like budgets have been slashed so much. There has been such a reliance on freelancers. And we're constantly being asked to do more and more with less and less. I'm really, and candidly, I have to be honest, a lot of why I'm able to do what I'm doing is because my grandpa made a lot of money and I inherited some of that. I was in a position where I could take the financial risk of doing that. I'm very fortunate. I'm not going to lie about that because I hate hearing it from people who've already gotten theirs, telling young freelancers, this is just part of it. It's like, you didn't that's a lie. You didn't have to go through this. You didn't, you did this when you had actual per word rates, or when photos were worth something.
Yep.
It's not the way it was. And even
different.
Even in the last 5 years, it's changed so much. And I don't like it when I hear people lie about that. When I hear, people who are in the position where they're established talking about freelancers complaining, like, no, it's gotten worse.
It's so bad. It's so bad. Like I was luckily, I've always had like a high video editing, video production background. Like I could everything from like After Effects I could do, and most other than like animation I can do. I feel pretty comfortable. So anytime I would go overseas, I would always try to have like at least one nonprofit client or one marketing client or something like that, and pretty much cover the bills. And then it was always anything journalism wise, it was always just for like passion stuff or try to keep going. It was always hard to just keep that full time. So, for me, like I'm just basically just working on passion. Like any stories, like, I when people ask me like, is it worth pitching or is it worth being published? Yes, I go get published. Like if you're starting out, go get your name recognized and everything. Is it going to continue to lead work? You're always going to have to pitch and sell. You're always going to have to keep going. It's just, you get that, when I got my first big publish with Vice and had a documentary, I thought I would have 10 more stories, right there off the bat.
What they don't tell you is that Vice's business model was based on having other people do it for them.
Yeah, I did all for them.
That's and I've worked for Vice, and I don't want to be too I'm not going to be as negative as some former Vice employees are.
Yeah.
I've only freelanced, and it wasn't terrible. I also have friends who still work there and are doing good work. But because people are, when I hear people like, oh, you worked with Vice, and they're like, that like. I remember how when I got my first byline at Vice, I thought like, oh, people are going to take notice. But what people have said was like, this is a really cool story from Vice.
Yeah.
No, I did that.
Yeah.
Me and my colleague did that. And it's just like, yeah, Vice didn't do that.
Yeah.
Vice published it.
I even got the licensing music for them. They sent me the graphics. I put all the last editing, the end credit kind of thing. I got it from there and fixed it into the video. The music that I used, they liked, and I helped them get the licensing from the music bed with that. I did all head to toe, but they transitioned news. I mean, they're one of the main reasons of how well online news did, so.
But I mean, but I guess bringing it back to the state of media. I mean, there's a lot to say. I mean, I do say that things are bad right now. I do see a lot of opportunities, and kind of like you mentioned, like with what Jake's doing over at Popular Front. Like there's exciting things here. And I also, one thing, like, as much as it does suck, and you do need foreign correspondents, you do need people to go out there. I actually am kind of digging how much the former fixers and the local journalists are making their way into Western media right now. As much as I like working overseas, and frankly, I'd love to bring some of them over to. I think you need a mixture of local perspective and outsider perspective, because sometimes it takes an outsider to notice problems.
100%. Yeah.
I don't think it's a question of one or the other. I'd love to have more like African journalists covering American politics.
That would be great.
I would love those perspectives. And we joke a bit about like, how would you write about this if it was happening in Africa? I'm like, I look at some of this like, how would a South African journalist write this if they were the White House correspondent? But it's been cool to see like how the New York Times, their Afghan bureau is stellar.
Yeah.
And it's made up of a lot. When you look at the bylines, that's a lot of Afghan names because they have Afghan journalists, and they're really great. They're doing great work.
Yeah, New York Times have done a really good job as far as like a legacy media adapting really quickly and effectively. Like they now have a subscription model, and they're like them and I guess Washington Post are like the only two that are really crushing it when it comes to subscription model. And so like,
they are also the two indispensable papers.
Yeah, exactly. That's true too. Their brand.
I give them both credit for things that they're doing. I also don't want to give them too much credit. Also, the Washington Post got to have Bezos pay for a lot of
unlimited resources.
Their capacity building. I mean, they're doing fine on their own terms, but they got a boost to make it happen.
Uh-huh.
I think it's alarming the cuts that we're seeing elsewhere. I think the collapse of American newspapers is going to be is a terrible thing. And also when it comes to foreign correspondence, something that I've actually noticed this is something that used to happen, and we've actually institutionally kind of forgotten about this. Is I'm from Portland, Oregon. I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I remember that like the Seattle Times used to have foreign bureaus. They had
Dallas Morning News here won a Pulitzer for the 2003 invasion photographer from the Dallas Morning News. Won a Pulitzer for his photography, in Baghdad.
Yeah. So something that I think is really bad is that a lot of our foreign correspondents are now almost exclusively running through publications that are up and down the Acela corridor. Are you working out of DC or New York? And that's not good. That's not good for us. It's not good for the way that perspectives are brought in. The shrinking, the concentration of media in places like that it's bad. It's not a good dynamic, and it breeds a certain sort of elitism that I don't care for. And that's not to say that everybody working out there is elitist and is bad. That's not true. But I don't, it's just not good. And it also, it creates this thing, and it's something that I've run up against where I'm at. And my editors have done a good job of humoring me. I work on a beat where the local and the international intersect. And there's discussions about how far out we look before I'm stepping out of my lane and going doing other things. Because like I am a local news reporter now, but also I live in a place that's very interconnected with the region in which I live. And, you know, with the Pacific Ocean, it involves fishermen and migrant workers. And, you know, we've got Indo-Pacific Command and the Pacific Fleet based here, and like lots of really important military headquarters. Like this is a hub of international activity where I'm at. And that intersects with what I'm doing day to day, even if I'm not covering it day to day. But it's local papers and like small and regional papers used to be a mixture of international and regional and local news. They used to do that. And it's not as if all of them have lost it. Like the Oregonian, my hometown paper, has continued to actually, they've done some really interesting stories about Saudi extradition policies.
Wow.
Because of crimes that, you know, that Saudis have committed in Portland and been kind of spirited away by the Saudi government so that they wouldn't ever have to see a courtroom or have to see jail time in the U.S. People commit crimes and they get spirited away. They pursued that story, and they would pursue it by like questioning attorneys generals in other states and following where that goes. I think that it would have been easy for them, and sometimes you run into this with local editors, because I like, even as I've been doing international stuff, I've also done, like when I worked with Vice, that was a story in Portland actually about the Sons of Confederate Veterans Oregon chapter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And you know, and I've worked for Crosscut, so I've done a variety of stuff that's I've never been purely an international or local news guy. I've always kind of been, so I mean, because I'm a freelancer, I take the money, you know.
Right.
If there's news in front of me and I can cover it, I'm gonna do it, and that's just kind of the way it's been. Again, sorry, I'm talking roundabout, but yeah, the point that I was making there is we're kind of seeing media fracture in a way that I think is not good, where different parts of media don't talk to each other as much as they should. In some ways, journalists are very connected, and others not. You see it sometimes where like the print people hang out with the print people, and like the broadcast people hang out with the broadcast people. But you also see it in the like international news. People talk to international news people, and local news people talk to local news people, and they don't see their jobs as being related.
That's so true.
And I think that that's a real problem, because also like your fixer is a local news reporter.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean,
it makes perfect sense. Yeah. I mean, even for me, I'm like, oh yeah.
like when you're out there, like, yeah, they are local news reporters. I mean, you might be looking for an angle that connects it more to America, but like this stuff is connected. And I had a really interesting experience where a lot of that all just kind of clicked. And also for my friend James, I was going to I went to a SPJ gala in Seattle, a Society of Professional Journalists, where they were giving out awards. And my date got sick, so she couldn't go. So my friend James was in town. He's a British Vice reporter, and I worked with him on a Vice story. We met in a coffee shop. That is its own story. How cool. I know. And he's evened out a lot, but when I met him, he was the viceiest Vice reporter you could possibly. He was such a.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. Great guy though, and courageous reporter. Done great work in Europe and in Africa. On migrants and all of that. Great guy. But, you know, he'd just gotten back from Mali around this time, and we were sitting in there, and he was hearing them talk about the stories that they were giving out for awards. And these were to, like, you know, local papers, and, you know, they were regional stories. And, you know, a lot of them were just kind of local watchdog stories. But they also talked about, you know, like, what was the impact? Like, well, this led to this law being changed and this being changed. And he's like, you know, I always kind of like, think I'm above that, because I'm super like I do these stories for Vice, and you know that you know this stuff sometimes seems so provincial. I don't know if that's the word that he used. He used some British word to describe it, but like I knew what he meant. But you know, it's like, you know, he's like, that stuff sometimes seems so beneath it, but like this stuff is important. Like, this stuff is important. Local journalism matters.
Yeah. I mean, the Epstein case came from the local newspaper there.
The
Miami Herald. Yep.
Yeah. One of the great American newspapers. Also, again, actually a paper that still does really good regional news in the Caribbean.
They've done a lot of Cuba stories too. That was really good. Yeah.
A lot of Cuba stuff, great paper. Hope it survives. It should. I mean, you don't hear it as much anymore, but I mean, they break stories a lot.
All the time.
Definitely one of the indispensable papers. It's one of those things that you don't read, but you hear CNN say, according to the Miami Herald. They get referred to a lot because, they're a very good paper. They do that important stuff in the Caribbean and Central America. They're papers like that still need to exist.
Is there a publication that you haven't been published yet, outlet yet, that is on your list, or are you kind of like, I didn't? Like for me, BBC. Like for me, it's the BBC. I haven't done anything with them ever before, and it's like if I did like one video for the BBC, I'd be like, okay, I'm good now.
That's a good question. Having written for the places that I've written now, I don't as much need I feel
nostalgia, of it. Yeah.
Pretty cool at this point. Things that I have done, I think, because I've had my work reprinted in Soldier of Fortune, which
cool.
I go back and forth about whether that's cool or not, given their history with apartheid. But it's cool every once in a while to say, like, my work has appeared in Soldier of Fortune. I feel like part of me says, like, I feel like I want to get published at Mother Jones so I can say that I've been published at Soldier of Fortune and Mother Jones.
Yeah.
Because I'll write for pretty much, there's few places that are truly off limits. If I can reach an audience and if I can convince them of something or let them see another side of things that they don't usually see, I'll do it. I'm willing to speak to pretty much any audience.
Yeah. That's
so
good.
I've worked with publications that are across the ideological spectrum. I prefer to just be, news first. I've written some opinion and analysis stuff. There was a period of time when we had such a high quota and War is Boring. I ended up writing columns just because, like, I don't have time to go out and report anything. We have to keep doing this. That was during one of the battle years after Medium, when we had a really bad corporate owner for a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I guess that would be cool. Maybe someday if somebody wants to hand me $2 million so I can launch a publication.
There you go. I'll be your first employee. I'll be your assistant.
Sure. Yeah. And it's interesting. And I also have I think I look at it in interesting ways as somebody who's been an editor and a writer and a photographer, and who's just seen so many different sides of it. And also, it was interesting being in kind of that, working inside of Medium without getting too much into the internal details, seeing kind of this new media, like media is changing so much.
So quickly.
Having worked in both, like, newspapers, like McClatchy, old school newspapers.
Old school, yeah.
Local, hometown, covering the bake sale newspaper. And working with these Silicon Valley companies, getting into media, and also working with these national magazines. I've had a very strange career, but I've gotten to see a lot of really interesting things and see how it works. I do think that media can be saved, but we gotta do some thing differently. I am encouraged in some ways by seeing, like, what Jake's doing. We mentioned that a few. But I'll also say that I worry about the Patreon revolution, because I think he's great, and I'm cool with him being unapologetically Jake and being voicey and doing his thing. But there's a danger in that too, not him specifically, but you see it with all kinds of.
I know what you mean. Yeah. Who
give the people what they want? They build up a brand because people feel they have a relationship with them, and also it incentivizes them to never change their mind, because they are being paid to give their audience precisely what they want to hear. And I worry that that is something that we're already seeing. We're seeing people set up their Substacks and their Patreons and serving up people a constant diet of, you're right, your beliefs are correct, and your way of looking at the world is right. And I worry that that's being incentivized.
Yeah, I think you are going to see more journalists like what Tim Pool is doing and all. I
wasn't going to say Tim Pool, but you can say it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I could. Yeah, yeah. I could say Tim Pool.
I think we're going to see more Tim Pools.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see the left wing version. I mean, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head, but there's definitely left wing versions of that. And I just don't. I don't care for that revolution. I don't care for.
I would listen to him in the beginning, and I was like, oh, okay, he made some good. I like to hear, like Tim's a smart guy. Like there's a lot of these journalists, but then it's almost like it's almost noticeable that they're trying to develop this brand, and I'm like, okay, now I don't know. Now I'm just like clogging it up, everything with YouTube.
I remember the first time I ever saw one of Tim Pool's streams. It actually wasn't that bad, and he was a lot more even-handed at that point. I don't remember when it was. I think it was maybe. I don't remember when it was, but like he was interviewing people, and he seemed to be interviewing them in good faith and quoted them correctly.
Yeah.
And he doesn't do that as much anymore. And yeah, but also I think his brand. He is becoming financially He is financially incentivized to say certain things and to have certain viewpoints and to give his audience the Tim perspective rather than to give them whatever the truth is. And he also doesn't do much. When was the last time he was in the field? He just sits
he doesn't. He says like, no, I still do phone calls and I do my research. And I was like. Well, anyone could do that,
Right. I mean, a lot of us do. I mean, most of my job is to do phone calls and research now. I don't get anywhere near as much. That's what most reporters do most of the time. It's not all
right. Research. Yeah.
But no, that is a concern that I have. I'm worried about that does that. I'm worried about media that caters to its audience. I think journalism should be, and that's the thing that I think distinguishes it from activism. Yeah. And I think I think you can do point of view journalism. I think you're allowed to do that. I read both Mother Jones and I read Reason. I read things across the political spectrum. But one thing I'll say, like, those two outlets come from a point of view, but they do not carry water for their movements.
I see what you mean.
Or for any particular politician. If somebody is changing their point of view, they take notice of that. If somebody lies, they point it out. Your job, and also it's about, you can interview somebody you disagree with, and you can tell people that you disagree with them, but you don't quote them in the way that makes them look the worst. You still give them the time of day to provide the best version of their argument and give them that fairness, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. Yeah.
You can be, I think a journalist can be, I don't think that the straight down the middle aspire to be neutral thing should ever go away. I think that there should always be a place for that. I don't think that biased journalism is automatically bad journalism. I think you can be biased and also fair.
Yeah.
I think fairness is what matters. Because I think the difference is, like, with activism, you're obviously advocating a point where you're trying to make the best version of your argument and downplaying what the other side may say. And, you do those kind of debate class tactics. When you're in a debate, your job is to win. When you're a journalist, I think your job is to inform.
Yep.
Your job is not to win. Your job is not to win an argument. I don't go out there looking to win. If anything, I never get to win.
Yeah, we don't win very much.
No, I had an argument with a friend of mine about how that was my philosophy on it, and he said, like, well, then you're a coward for not taking a side, and you always get to win the argument. Like, no, I never get to win the argument. I'm chronically disappointed because I see how everything else fails. I think like a way that I would explain it is if you're somebody who perhaps the war in Afghanistan, should U.S. troops stay? Should they go? If you're somebody who says, I think American troops should leave, I'm going to force you to read a bunch of articles about the Taliban murdering teachers and attacking schools, and about Al-Qaeda regrouping in the region. I'm going to force you to read those and all right,
how they treat, yeah.
You're going to do that. But if somebody says, I support U.S. troops staying, okay, well, I'm going to force you to look at the numbers of drone strikes and how many civilians they kill. I'm going to show you how much this thing costs, and I'm going to have you look at the casualties.
Yeah.
Neither of these are consequence-free decisions. They have consequences, and you need to consider the consequences. And I think as a journalist, your job is to present the consequences and document the consequences of policymakers and of voters. The other thing I think is to frequently remind voters that that they are not passive. You're a taxpayer. Perhaps you're for the war, perhaps you're against it. Whatever your position on it, your tax dollars pay for every single bullet that gets fired over there. Each one of those, so you can look at it, it's the Navy SEALs did not shoot those bullets. They are not pouring, they are pouring ammunition into these combat zones, but you are too.
Yeah.
Every time they pull the trigger, they do it on your dime, and they shoot a bullet that you paid for.
Yeah.
And that's just something that Americans and any taxpayer needs to know. They have to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I think international foreign coverage is so important because Americans don't realize how influential the U.S. is around the world. It's so connected. So many things that the U.S. government does or what we do has such a world effect on it. And I hope international coverage I hope there's a better, I don't know. I hope more people are interested. And maybe there are people interested. Maybe the right people are reading it. It's just hard to know if people are caring for it. Because there is a little bit of me of okay, if I do this story and the journalist in me is oh, I hope I make this better, or hope I change people's minds, and yay, then you get jaded after a while and you're okay, I'm doing this for what's the best budget? How can I make money for it? And then,
right.
And so those are the kind of things I struggle with. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I do think it is that challenge where local media has lost its connection to foreign issues that it used to have. It's lost the expertise that it used to have because it's lost the editors that used to go between the foreign and local desk and knew that it was part of the same thing. That kind of perspective is fading. I don't entirely know what the solution is. I do think that there are certainly people who pay attention. There are people who do care. It is a challenge, though, because I think that Americans have been taught over the last few years not to.
I agree. Yeah.
I think it's maybe not so much not to care, because there was always that. There's always been activism. But
they're going to be what can I do? What's the average? Yeah, I see what you mean.
Well, something that happened after. So this happened after 9/11. This was soon after when George Bush told people not to worry about it. He gave that go to the mall. We'll take care of this. And I don't want to go too long on this, but I do think that I hate to say it, but I'll say it. I do think that, I don't want to get too far into my own opinions on things.
Yeah.
I signed a contract that says I don't have opinions.
No, I get it. Yeah.
But I'll say right off, I don't have partisan opinions, but something that I do think we should consider, and I go back and forth about how I personally feel about it. A lot of it really comes down to the end of the draft. And it's so something that people misremember about the Vietnam War protests. Americans were not, by and large, against the war in Vietnam. They were against the draft. That's what a lot of those protests were about. Mm-hmm. A lot of those protests were about ending the draft. Some of them talked about ending the war, but a lot of it really was, I don't want to go fight in Vietnam. I don't want my kids to go fight in Vietnam. I don't care about Vietnam, because when Nixon ended the draft in 1973, protests dropped off pretty quick.
Yeah.
Or whatever year it was. I might be wrong about the year. But anyway, because U.S. troops were still in the country in 1973 and still fighting. U.S. troops didn't leave Vietnam. I mean, that Vietnamization was still going on, and kind of like, the same sort of stuff that we've been seeing over a much longer period of time in Iraq and Afghanistan. War's over, kind of.
We did it. We're coming home. Yeah.
But and that was the idea. Like, they just we told them that the boys are home, so it's fine. But the boys weren't home. And that was I gave my thing again about how Bush said, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it with our all volunteer military. Your kids don't have to worry about it unless they want to. We'll take care of it. And then it was during the Obama years, you heard no boots on ground.
Yeah.
That was the thing. And people believed that. They heard oh, well, it's fine. Right. We're leaving Afghanistan, and no boots on ground. I remember back in 2014 when after ISIS fell, and when we started, when Sinjar started, and when we started hitting back and we started sending the bombers out there, or fighters. We didn't really send bombers, but when we started hitting ISIS targets, I remember hearing John Kerry on NPR and some reporter asking him about whether we were going back to war in Iraq. And I remember he said, I think it would be really irresponsible to call this a war. This is a limited counterterrorism engagement.
Oh, and God.
Stuff like that has convinced Americans that, we've got troops and people realize that, but it's hard for people to wrap their heads around it because we've kind of trained them not to worry about it.
Yeah.
We've trained the American public, and not just the American public, the European public too, even though they have troops over there. This isn't a uniquely American phenomenon. British troops are...
Italians are there. The French are there. German troops are there. Yeah.
Yeah, and also and fighting other wars. You got the French in Mali. They sent a bunch of them to the Central African Republic, Australia going play. Yeah, these militaries are going and they're conducting operations. And we weren't the only ones that ended the draft. Norway still has conscription, but they don't ever send their conscripts to war. They only send their volunteers to war, which I think that makes sense. And I think in a certain sort of way, because at least people have that sense of civic responsibility to feel a connection to their armed forces because they all did it for a while.
Right.
But they don't force people to go to war. But yeah, it's an odd thing where, we just keep doing this, and we have all of this happening and all this diplomatic stuff, and people just don't feel that connection to it because that's just a job. The professionals will handle that.
Yeah. Example is I've been going since I was, 19, 20 years old. This will be the first year I haven't been Iraq since 2010. This will be the first year I haven't gone. I've gone 3 or 4 times every year since 2010. This will be the first year I haven't gone, which kind of sucks. Cause it is it's like a second home, second place to me.
Yeah.
But my folks who are very well traveled, my dad is in the rice business. He's very well traveled. My mom is well traveled. I think they only followed that kind of stories because their son was in it. If it wasn't really for me or anything, even that, when I'm home, I don't even think they keep up, what internet. My dad definitely does because he follows the Iraqi rice grain board and stuff like that, and follow trading and how the world market is doing, but that specific kind of thing. So that totally makes sense what you were saying. It's they were there's only so much content you can consume.
Sure. Oh no, and I don't expect people to have I don't need people to know commanders and warlords and all the factions. I don't need people to know that. I don't care if people know all about that. They don't need to know all the specifics of everything, but it would be nice if people did have a casual understanding. Like I think I saw recently, I haven't been watching the Jack Ryan show, and I know we're going super long here. We'll wrap it up.
No. I was making sure I have enough battery. We're good. No, I've always wanted to do like a nearly 2-hour podcast just to like see what it was like, and I'm like, okay, cool. Like,
all right, we'll definitely get around there by the time this is
awesome.
But yeah, or what?
Oh,
what
so
we
were talking about what were we talking about?
How your parents only saw this on like the connection that people have. I've thought about this too, and I think that one of that does bring us back to, I think, the state of media, and I think it's over concentration in New York and DC.
Yeah,
I think that comes to it too, because I know that I definitely I have friends from from Portland and from Parkland, Washington, and from Tacoma and those areas that I lived in, who read my stuff. They're not experts on this stuff, but they read it like, oh, I have a passing understanding about that. I kind of remember that. That feels like maybe it matters. We do need reporters to come from different parts of of the world, because it also matters that people know somebody who does this and have that engagement with it. I think that's also that's a challenge that's really fueled also the separation of media from the communities that they cover. Because we're drawing so many of our, and I'm not going to rag too hard on Columbia grads. I've met some really good ones, but I also don't think Columbia grads are special. And papers really act like, a Columbia grad, like that's what we need. Like, yeah, that's what we need. More people or Columbia grads from New York, or like,
I feel like the entire economist department is all from Columbia grads. And so,
but that's at our local papers too. But also when these papers and the magazines used to have large staffs, as much as there's so much content out there now, and we have these websites and that's cool, but we don't have healthy, fully staffed magazines, newspapers, or even web outlets. I mean, some of them are big, but and even the ones that are big, they're all the ones that are centralized in New York, or in LA, like BuzzFeed was huge, and it hired a lot of people from a lot of places, but was it good to? I mean, we know the answer now because it ran into so many problems. It wasn't a good idea to headquarters all that in the most expensive
place in the world. Same with Mike.com and
is that so much of media is concentrated in really expensive places. I remember actually having this conversation. This was a Twitter exchange, and I don't remember who started it, but it was interesting how people got real about it real quick. It was mentioned, why do these startups always get placed in San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York or DC? It's ridiculous to keep doing that. The overhead is so much.
So crazy.
Somebody responded, he's like, well, this is where the young people want to be. And it's like, is it? No, this is where you make us move to work. This is where you tell us we have to be. And it was a lot of people saying, no, if you could, I bet if you could set up a mid-sized media platform in Nashville or Memphis, Memphis, I think I did the math at one point. Memphis was the cheapest city to live in.
Memphis is awesome.
That's also because of the crime, but But hey, that means there's no shortage of things to cover. I would work at an outlet based in Memphis. There's this obsession with trying to be, and also I think this misguided belief that people want to be in the mix in New York. That's where people want to be.
Yeah, I mean, I love visiting New York. I have good friends there. I used to go to the Sebastian Junger's pub, the Half King. I don't know if you ever went there. Awesome place. I'm sad that it's not there anymore. And it was, I mean, it's fun. I mean, that's where you meet a lot of cool going to Williamsburg and hanging out with different Vice journalists, and like I get it, but I've always lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, lived in Austin, lived in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I was able to do this kind of work. Yeah, I probably could have gotten more work, but I always made sure I lived in a affordable place, just to make sure, because I knew how expensive. And plus, to me, in my head, I'm like, I had to think of like how I know what my friends are going through in New York and LA. Like, there's no way how I'm not going to how I'm trying to see this play out. I'm like, no, I'm just going to stay where it would be nice to like take up meetings and stuff like that. But like, I've done the whole networking thing and I get it, like whatever. So,
now,
yeah.
And most of the times it's anytime I went to San Francisco for work, that was because Medium paid for it. I'm not going to spend money on an Airbnb out there and go out there. Absolutely not. And when I was in New York, I was always I couch surfed.
Yeah.
To get where I need to go to make sure that I wasn't spending that money. It's expensive. My experience kind of working with Playboy, which doesn't really this year actually. Like I was with them right around the time that they started publishing kind of their last bits as an actual magazine.
Right.
I did really great. Me and my colleague Kimberly Westenheiser did a profile on Blue Pfeiffer, who is a phenomenally talented Lebanese singer and performer who actually just had
she did a music video, right? I think I watched it. It was really good.
Yeah, I'm glad she's really. Reuters went out and got a portrait of her, and she's
cool.
in a French newspaper, and people are really taking note, and I'm so glad about that. She deserves it. She's worked really hard, and she's just a really wonderful, really authentic person who you can tell really cares about her fans, really cares about the art, and really just phenomenal person. But Playboy kind of shut down that, and they're just a lifestyle brand now. They sell T-shirts with the logo. And that had been something that had been kind of brewing for a long time. And it was kind of, after Hugh died, it was kind of, how much is the magazine going to be around? Because it had been that battle for a while of the Hefner family trying to keep the magazine going. Because they're because corporate guys had kind of moved in, and they'd expanded the empire, and they'd always done well with like their clubs, but what they were kind of realizing is like the magazine doesn't make money.
Yeah, in the end, you look at what's I see what you mean.
Like clubs and merch make money, but the magazine doesn't make money. I
see what you mean.
Because porn is free now, and like there were still people who read it for the articles. I mean, ironically, near the end, the people who were buying it were still were either people who had very discerning tastes and actually liked the photography, because the photography was artsy. It was good photography, regardless of how you feel about that. And the articles were good. Like near the end, it was a very good. That's one of the things that's sad. It was a very good magazine at the end with a really good editorial team. But it got eaten up by a lifestyle brand that decided we don't want to do journalism anymore. We're no longer interested. We want to sell T-shirts. We want the bunny logo. We don't want all the rest of that. We want the logo that people see so we can sell handbags and clothes.
Yeah.
And so that is, I think, so on the one hand, I see potential in the lifestyle brand model, but I also see how it can be eaten out the other end.
Right, where you just put everything towards what's making you money. Versus,
that all comes down to who's making the decisions, who's at the steering wheel. It does really, you need to do that, and if that sort of thing is to exist, to justify it, you need to. I think the reason why I think Coffee or Die at least is going to stick around for a while. I think it is because it is, if for no other reason, I think it is because while Black Rifle has become very profitable, it's still a smaller company, and it really lives on its relationship with its fans.
Yeah.
Coffee or Die is very much about building that relationship with the fans and cultivating that by. So if that sort of business model is going to work, content aside, no matter what it is you're selling, you need to convince management that supporting journalism and supporting like thought-provoking things is building that they are really enjoying this thing. Like, it might cost money, but if it's something that your fans enjoy and it's something that it's worth using the proceeds to continue supporting, like if you can convince CEOs of that, maybe it will continue. But I think it's always tenuous. You know, you like, and that's just the reality of working in journalism. You can just wake up one day and just hear the news like, yeah, nope, this contract is done, or like, yeah. Like, I mean, similarly, like in terms of like nonprofit, I don't know if you remember the magazine Pacific Standard.
Yeah.
Yeah, the entire staff of that just woke up one day and like the nonprofit foundation that paid for all of it was like,
yeah, we're done.
It's over. And they just woke up and they're like, what? Yeah. It's like, yep, it's done. It's all gone. Like, it's not going to happen anymore. No warning. Everybody found out at the same time. They're just like,
fuck.
It's over. Pack your bags. This is the end of it. That risk will always be there. So yeah, I think that's the real reality, is that, you know, we've got these things like Jake's doing. We have
Tim Pool, like the YouTuber style, Coffee or Die. Yeah.
But I think the reality is just there's never going to be a silver bullet. There's no silver bullet that's going to slay the vulture capitalists that want to take it apart. There's never going to be, there's no magic thing that's going to save you. There's no spell. It's just going to be a constant effort, a constant exhausting effort.
So I guess we'll go with, when you were you were in Iraq and Syria when COVID was coming up. It was like, I
was on the Iraq side.
Side?
I was,
okay.
Yeah. I like embedded. I was, well, I mean, so, all right, I'll talk about it. I went there knowing that the virus was starting to spread, but like we were so innocent then. It was late February that I went. It was when airports were starting to take precautions. You know, they were asking, you know, have you been to China recently? And, you know, there were screenings and you know, people were starting to take it seriously. I have to admit, I wasn't taking it anywhere near as seriously as I should have. But I wasn't alone in that. To give an example of how I wasn't alone in that, like my first night in Iraq, when I got back in Erbil, I went to an NGO party.
Yeah, I missed those.
That was Corona themed.
Oh my gosh, I'm not surprised.
We were drinking Corona beers, and you know, there were red balloons everywhere that represented the virus.
Let's see. I'm trying to think what NGO would be. It would probably be like NRC, or let's see.
I'm not going to say who it was. It was a mixture of people. Well, no, like I'm not going to bust on them. Like, you know,
no. I was just mostly joking. Just I used to go to all those parties, and I'm just giving them a hard time.
Journalists have the same irreverent sense of humor sometimes, but it's a different side of the NGO scene that a lot of people would imagine. NGO people are not quite how they think they are. The movies, but these were people who I liked most of them. That wasn't an issue. But yeah, that was there. I did 2 rounds of embeds because there was a separation in between getting to the different units. So I did go back to Erbil. I went back to Erbil. I went to Kirkuk, to K1, and talked to them about, I would document kind of as they were shutting things down. They were getting ready to leave the base. That was pre-planned. They knew that was one of the bases that they were going to shut down and consolidate and move some operations elsewhere. Met some Navy SEALs.
That's cool.
They sucked. They were assholes.
Yeah. You mean they weren't cool and kind and badass beards like you always see? So,
Oh, they had the beards. Like they
yeah.
no, they were walking stereotypes, and
Yeah.
well, I mean,
When they're in it, they're in it. Yeah.
some of them were cool.
You know who were cool that I met with the British SAS guys.
Yeah.
I met some of them. They were cool.
I'll give you an example though. So I got stopped by one of the guys who one of the SEALs stopped me while I was on my way to Chow and confronted me about who I was and what I was doing on the base, which I had questions about his situational awareness because I'd already had my plate carrier with my press stuff on it. I'd been there for 5 days. I'd been there for a while at that point, and I told him what I was there. I've got permission to be here. I'm embedded. And he's like, don't take pictures of us. Don't take pictures of anything we're doing. And I'm like, I'm actually here to write about the Army guys, the ones that provide your security and all your logistics that allow you to do what you guys are doing. You're not self-sustaining out here. And I went to go talk to the squadron commander, because these were cavalry guys, and their sergeant major, and I told him hey, just so you know, I had this interaction with the SEALs, not because I was concerned about me, but I was concerned about them, in case they talk to you or they're upset about me being here and being embedded with you guys.
Right. Just clear communication you were trying to do.
And without standing up from his desk, the sergeant major just said, "Fuck him." it has been clear that this wasn't the first time he'd had work. He just I'm just not, and he
not
told
in the mood. Yeah,
stories about that I won't repeat.
Yeah, right.
It was interesting out there, but I went out there, and while I was out there, I learned that all the bars had been closed in Erbil, and I was like, that sucks. I was angry. I was angry at that. I'm like, and I was still at that point. I was like, it's just a cold. I mean, I was taking it a little bit more seriously than that. I recognized that. I think it was when we heard 2% fatality rate, which actually, if you do the numbers on the whole world, that's actually a lot of. Yeah. Which is what we've been learning. 2% of people is actually a lot of people. But yeah, I was, I'm young, not taking it seriously, and I got back to Erbil. I'm like, I can't go to a bar. This sucks. But so there was that, and then I went back. Then I went back out and linked up with the Marines down in.
Too bad you didn't get to go to T-Bar in Erbil.
I mean, I've been to T-Bar.
Yeah, T-Bar. There's two of them. There's the one that's in Nkawa, and then the one, I guess it's in Nkawa, but it's down there. Yeah.
Well, this is the one next to the embassy.
The consulate. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have definitely been to T-Bar.
Oh, yeah.
I've been to T-Bar. I've been to Teachers.
Yeah, Teachers. I like Teachers more in the summertime. Wintertime is that. It's just one giant. Everyone's just smoking cigarettes in that one room.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's dope in the
summertime's awesome.
Patio. It's. I when I was there over the summer, they set up a rum bar out in the patio.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty good actually. I was actually aside. They made a pretty Vision Blue Hawaiian out there.
Oh, that's
cool.
I
remember I was back in Seattle and I was at kind of a tiki-ish place and I'm like, I'll get a Blue Hawaiian, and they made it for me. And I was like, this one sucks. They made a better Blue Hawaiian in Kurdistan.
So you're in so you're in Erbil, and at this point, were you just waiting to buy a plane ticket, or were you just there just for R&R kind of thing, or?
This was in or which time? This was in between embeds with units because I was with.
Got it. Okay.
I was with the cavalry guys in Kirkuk, and then they bumped me back to Erbil for a bit, and then I was going to go back out again with a different unit in a completely different part of the country. I would have stayed even longer actually with the guys in Kirkuk, but they told me you need to get on this helicopter because they had this thing called the Curse of K1, where the weather would prevent helicopters from getting out there, and it was kind of not on the regular resupply routes. So people could get stuck there. And I actually, because while I was there was a bunch of people who got stuck there while I was there, some contractors and some guys from another were out there for units. They were there for much longer than they were supposed to be. So they were kind of like I would have been willing to stay and cover more what was going out there, but I had gotten enough, and I wrote like a 3,500 word treatise. Like, it might have even been 4,000 words. It was long.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think it was 4,500 words. I wrote a very long feature about their experience out there and stuff. So I had more than enough. But yeah, they were like, you got to get on this helicopter, because if you don't, you're never going to leave. We're not even sure if we're ever going to leave.
Dang.
They say we are. We're not sure. Like, jokingly, but kind of not. So yeah, I got back to Erbil, was there for like a day and a half, I think, before I got on the plane to go down to Anbar with the Marines. And yeah, I got down to the Marines. We went out and met their counterparts, the Iraqi Army guys. We went out to the ranch, which was a little outpost that some of the Marines ran and that the advisors were at. Though a lot of the advising had been cut down a lot because of COVID. Like this was, things are really starting to. Everybody was starting to really realize, like, this is real.
Shit.
like the world is changing. I mean, a few things happened while I was there. One, while I was there, Taji got attacked twice.
Mm-hmm.
Like things were heating up both in terms of COVID and in terms of other things. Like things were starting to get not good. And yeah, I was on that base down there. They were sharing it, like I said, with Kataib Hezbollah. Like, they were there. They were our neighbors, and that was one of the things that was also awkward, because Taji got hit and some Brits and Americans got killed.
Yeah.
And I went out with the Marines, some of the officers, to meet with the Iraqi officers, and one of them just said point blank, like, look, base north of here got hit, and I think we all know who did it. I know who did it. You did it. You know who did it.
Fuck.
And he didn't say you did it, but he's like, we know who did it. You know who did it. We're uncomfortable because they're on this base. And, and the Iraqi army, like, they have, like, factionalized as it is. There were definitely a lot of people on that base who were with the Iraqi army. Some of them were cushy with the Kataib Hezbollah guys, but some of them definitely weren't. Some of them really didn't like them. And we won't go on another long rant about all the politics of that, but there was some resentment among the Iraqi army that there hadn't been so much attention paid to like all the propaganda around how the PMF was the ones who did all the work to get ISIS out of Anbar. And they definitely were there, and they did do some of that, but it's not like the Iraqi army did nothing. And some of them really didn't like the way that Kataib Hezbollah acts like they had won the war.
Right.
There was a lot of tensions on all ends. Like, there was tension between the Marines and the Iraqi army, between the Iraqi army and the PMF, between the PMF and the Marines, and also like the Sunni cops who were stuck in the middle. who also like, the Marines had been advising, and there were questions about, like, all right, well, it looks like we're going to be shutting down and leaving, and like, are these Sunni cops that we've been training going to get any real support? Like, these tribal cops, like, now that the Shia authorities are kind of back out here,
backing out, yeah.
Have we learned anything in Anbar, or is history going to repeat itself over and over again? And I remember, talking, like, a lot of the officers there, you could tell that they definitely liked the police that they were working with. And they liked some of the Iraqi army guys, not all of them. Like, some of them were kind of cynical, some of them were kind of burned on it. But I remember one of them kind of saying, I got to remind myself that I can't care about what happens in this country more than they do.
Yeah.
Like, I can't do that. And that's just kind of the way it is. But yeah, that was kind of happening. Yeah, COVID was really starting, like, borders were shutting down. And that was when I started realizing, like, oh, okay, I need to get out of here. Or, I mean, in some ways, like, I considered even, like, whether maybe I should just stay in Iraq. I've been thinking about moving to Erbil anyway. But, I still have a lease with all my stuff out out in Tacoma. I definitely don't want to pay for a place where I don't live. So I felt like, well, whatever happened, like I need to get that taken care of because I can't just pay rent in a place that I don't live while during a pandemic that's going to last who knows how long.
Who knows? Yeah.
Because that was that point where, like the world was kind of collapsing and nobody really understood what was going on. Like very rapidly, there was a drawdown and a reorientation of forces. People were packing up and leaving. Like some of the smaller nation contingents were packing up and leaving while I was there. And like I was at that base with there was a Canadian advising team, but they had stopped advising, so they were just kind of sitting in the USO all day, watching TV. The weirdest thing was like because I was watching all the like COVID press conferences with them, like watching Fauci and watching Trump with the Canadians. And the weirdest happened was Jimmy Kimmel came on the AFN network, but Jimmy Kimmel wasn't hosting. Pete Buttigieg was the guest host of the Jimmy Kimmel show.
Oh yeah. He does those episodes every once in a while. Yeah.
So Pete Buttigieg comes on the screen on the Jimmy Kimmel show, and I'm sitting there like as the world is collapsing and sitting with these Canadian Army guys. I'm like, what is going on? Why is Pete Buttigieg on my TV interviewing Patrick Stewart? And the Canadian guys are sitting like they're like, who the fuck is that guy? And then they're like talking about themselves like, oh, he was the mayor of like some town in Wisconsin. Like he was running for president. Like, huh?
It's like Wisconsin or like Iowa or something like that.
Oh, Indiana.
Sorry. Yeah, it was like an I. Yeah.
I should know that better, but yeah, no, it was Indiana. But yeah, like they're like, he's funny. I like him. Like I would have voted for him. I'm like, this is so weird, and yeah, I needed to get out of there. I found out that my ticket. I got a text saying I don't remember what the details were. Like it was basically it was saying like, you know, your flight has been changed. I'm like, what does that mean? But there were two like I got an email and a text from that both kind of conflicted, and they said contradictory things. Like one of them said like your flight is still scheduled, but like there were connecting flights in my flight. So I was like, huh. I remember talking to the Marines. I should check on this. And they're like, you should check on it. Dang. And I checked on it. And what had happened, of course, was my flight from Erbil to Austria had been canceled, but the flight from Austria to the States wasn't yet.
Interesting.
Because you know they're connecting flights. They were different flights.
Yeah, right.
That does make sense. But I had to call, and I had to get. It was like I had to get on.
I do like that flight though. I like Austria. I like going through Austria versus Istanbul. So
yeah, and this was also when everything was going wrong. So it was like your wait time is 3 hours. And I finally got onto them, and they were like, "So what's going on?" And it's like, "Yeah, it looks like that's happened. Like this flight." I'm like, "Well, can I?" Then I probably need to cancel this other flight. Like, well, yeah, okay, well we can do that. We can refund it, but you won't get this or that if you do that. I'm like, okay, well, can I rebook a flight out of Iraq then? Well, no, because the airport is closed. I'm like, well, then I'm going to have to cancel that other flight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to have to cancel it because I'm not going to pay for a flight that I'm not going to get on. Because my flight wasn't canceled, but my airline was canceled. Like they had stopped providing service to Iraq, to Erbil. And then it was not long after that the Iraqi civil authority said like all the airports are closed, so like no flights in or out. It's just like, well, that's not good.
Oh man.
And also it was a challenge getting out of. So my embed was over. By this point, usually you have an escort when you're embedded. The second time I was out there because there was media kind of floating around, and also because the public affairs team for the coalition was pretty strained. They were like, you know, you've been here before, and you respect OPSEC, and you know, not everything you write is super nice, but everything you write is fair and factual. We trust you just go from base to base, and they just kind of appointed somebody to be my minder whenever I got to a base, but I didn't have a dedicated public affairs officer with me.
Oh, wow.
Which proved to be a problem as we were trying to navigate. Because I didn't have the right credentials to prove that I was really...
and you need that U.S. military badge or something like that to...
Right, and I didn't have that. I had press credentials, but they're like, we don't... Like, that's not a CAC card, and that's not... And, like, the KBR contractors are like, only people with military IDs can fly on these planes. I'm like, well, how do you think I got here? How do I leave? Ultimately, like, the Air Force was real strict about it. I ultimately had to get out on, not just with the Canadian troops, but also, like, on a Canadian plane.
Dang.
Because the Air Force had less... They just had less paperwork, so I could get on the Canadian bird that was moving around. But that was the other thing. Like I got out of Anbar on a flight to Taji, because Taji was actually on the flight path to Erbil, and Anbar was kind of inconsistent with that, and it was kind of like, we need to get you on this flight because otherwise, again, similar to like the last time, like if you don't leave now, you're gonna have to wait possibly a week, possibly longer, for another flight that will get you where you need to go. Taji will get you closer to where you need to go. So I went to Taji after it had been rocketed. And there were some people out there who I had embedded with previously, and I ran into some of them. And one of them kind of told me, like, you need to get out of Iraq. Things are about to get really bad here.
Dang.
And this was right before the Patriot missile system showed up. And I think it got rushed there because I was kind of told, like, hey, you remember what happened to al-Assad? Our intelligence suggests that's going to happen again. And they're like, you don't want to be here. Like, this was again, like, this had the Patriots not showed up, I don't know what would have happened, but they were real nervous. They were real uncomfortable with the situation. But yeah, I made it up to Erbil, back to the airport. And I thought that I was going to get back to my friend's apartment, but that they were locked down too. They're like, yeah, we're not going outside the wire. COVID.
Dang.
My friend's apartment was in Royal City.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Like 5 minutes from the airport. Right?
Yeah, it's like right there.
Yeah. That's where the rest of my luggage was. Couldn't go. Couldn't get there. I was stuck in Erbil again for like a week at the base. And again, also without documents. So they wouldn't even like... I was really lucky because the officer who was kind of responsible for he never took care of things whenever I was at the airport. Like he was just... But I ran into the sergeant major of the unit that I had been with in Mosul. He was on the tarmac. I was like, I saw him immediately. I was like, hey man. He's like, where are you headed? Like, I don't know. So he gave me a ride, and he sent me to the camp where they had set up. They were withdrawing from Mosul,
okay,
which that hadn't been planned. They had a very rapid withdrawal, but they ended up like first one of the officers they tried to get me set up with like the transient lodging where the contractors and
right.
But yeah, then they would look at me and just like, he doesn't have documents, he can't be here. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, okay. And we went and talked to like the base like managers, like the officers who were running it, and they're like, yeah, he doesn't have that documentation. And they're like, he's your problem now. So I stayed with that unit. Then I went to go try to get food, and they said they wouldn't serve me because, again,
look, this is all probably really good connections, though. Like, you're bouncing around. I'm not sure. I'm sure you still, to do embeds and stuff like that, still requires paperwork. But I'm sure, in hindsight, maybe it is making good connections through all this.
No, I have a real respect for. I really lucked out the time that I was, because also you'll notice that there really hadn't been a lot of embeds with U.S. forces.
No, none.
That because commanders were really against it. I was just super lucky that I showed up at a time when the leadership that was cycling through the country and also their public affairs officer were into it and pushed that. And something that I'll say, like, so Miles Kagans was the spokesperson while I was there. He was the main public affairs.
Yeah, he's from Texas, I think. I think his branch is Texas.
Well, he's in Texas now. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. He's not Texan, but I think it was from like he's based in Texas. Yeah.
He is. He's at Hood. He was really. I really respected him a lot. He was always as honest as he could be. And I think the big thing is the way that he really developed a relationship also with local media in a way that I don't think I've ever seen U.S. forces really do. Because when I went I went back to K1 because I couldn't leave Erbil, the base. But they were like, well, while you're stuck here, though, we can get you on a helicopter to go back to K1 and watch them officially close it. It's like, sure, I don't have anything better to do. And Kagan's was going out there that day. But I went out there with a crew from Ruda.
Oh, cool.
So Ruda came out to the base, and they flew not American helicopters. They were actually Italian helicopters. But yeah, he really gave local media access in a way that I think was – and it was interesting watching him interact with local media because he never talked down to local media. And it was interesting the way that people really – even regardless of how they felt about the coalition or American policy, they all liked Kagan's because he was a good interview. He
didn't look down on him. He was like, That plays a lot with with the local people.
Yeah. I've talked to some of the PAOs since then a little bit. I don't know when or if I'll get to revisit kind of that story because I want to write something bigger about their whole deployment. Because I think it is unique. They were there for the invasion of Syria, the death of Qasem Soleimani, COVID, and then they came home to the George Floyd protests.
That's crazy.
They had such an interesting, and I think they don't even really realize how fucking wild.
And a lot of people probably don't even know that they're back. That group.
Yeah, well, but even the group itself, they even like I talked to them because one of the things because they never got most of them didn't get in the wild firefights though. Like they had some crazy rocket attacks, but they didn't feel like they really did it that deployment in some ways. And I think someday some of them will realize actually that was actually the results of their discipline because that was something that was really something that I saw was the way that their officers and their NCOs talked to them about when they were going outside the wire, like, hey,
yeah,
we don't want to fight with the Iranians. Like, the PMF is going to try to, because the PMF would try to like
push your buttons. Yeah.
They'd flip them off. They'd surround their vehicles. They'd run it like they'd kind of do things at checkpoints. They'd push their buttons, and like they wanted to try to provoke the Americans into shooting them, and they were like, "Don't do it." And it was really amazing to see how everyone from 18-year-old enlisted guys up to the officers understood, like, you got to show discipline. You got to do this right. And like some of them, I think, were kind of disappointed that they didn't get that firefight. Obviously, like I understand that. Clearly, I understand that. But I admire that even though they wanted it, some of them really wanted it so bad, especially after they'd been getting rocketed. And
let's go. Yeah.
Like some of them really were like, yeah, it's go time. Let's do it. But they didn't. And there was so much opportunity for something to go wrong.
Oh,
for some.
And it only takes only one thing. Yeah.
And I really think that group of soldiers really. They experienced such a weird war. And it was something different. But I was experiencing something very weird with them too. Because eventually, so I did get out. Eventually, I was able to get myself on a repatriation flight, and Black Rifle Coffee Company paid for my repatriation, which was $4,000.
Holy! And wasn't
I will never. I've got various opinions about how the company does things, but like I said, their editors were always good to me, and when push came to shove, they looked out for me.
Yeah.
So whatever criticisms I may offer of them, and whatever other people have to say. And like, because I had this conversation with somebody recently who had some real criticisms of things they'd been doing lately. And I said, I won't challenge you on a single thing that you're saying right now. But I also am just going to tell you that, like, I am not going to be in a position where, like, I'm just never going to, I don't have a dog in that fight anymore, because one, I don't work for them anymore, but two, they looked out for me at a moment that could have been real
bad. Yeah.
Because it was ridiculous. Like, yeah, like that was the other thing. Like, a repatriation ticket cost $4,000. That was
like a first class ticket for a lot of thing.
Yeah, they just packed us all on Qatar Airways. I'll say Qatar Airways was like the only airline that was operating and doing these flights. They actually, for a while, changed their tagline to "We'll take you home."
Wow,
which was pretty good branding.
That is pretty good.
Because they were the only game in town. It's like, we will take you home. Yeah, I had to get on them, so they got all of us to Doha, which was the hub to get back from at that point. So we went to Doha, and then from Doha I got on a flight to Miami, and then from there even I had to get another flight, separate from the $4,000 flight. So getting back to the States was $4,000.
Golly.
Getting home I had to get the rest of the way. So I had to go do a connecting flight in Dallas and then get to Portland, and then I had to quarantine. My car was in Portland at my parents' house, and then I had to drive back up to Tacoma where my apartment actually was. And yeah, I missed the part where I accepted my job out here in Hawaii. I was offered the job. I'd applied for Report for America, which is how I got the job. I applied for that last year. Just signed up for it. I'm like, maybe I get a job there, maybe I don't. And Report for America fills vacancies at newsrooms around the country. Awesome organization. I signed up for all the military reporting jobs, but I also said that I was willing to cover immigration or the environment. Like, I'll take your money. It was my philosophy. Because I was getting a bit burnt out on freelancing,
right?
Or if for no other reason, like, hey, maybe I get this job, maybe I don't. It was a real challenge, like getting I had to get like all the right devices to actually get those interviews. Like, I thought I had missed one of them because I had a Zoom call with one of them, but I was working on military Wi-Fi.
Oh gosh.
And I thought that I had missed it, and eventually I was able to get her on the USO line because she had a number listed. And she's like, "You called me, like you made it." Because I missed the original one. She's like, "Well, I think you get the job just by you're in Iraq." And I accepted the job, actually being unsure. Like, I hadn't actually got a plane ticket back. Like, I accepted the job. I did tell my editor, like, caveat, in full disclosure, I'm not sure if I'm going to make it to Hawaii. I'm not sure if I'm going to make it to the mainland. I'm not sure if I'm ever going to leave Kurdistan ever. Because the airport's not operational again yet. So I'll say yes to this, but I have to tell you that. And luckily, I was able to get through all that. But it was weird, because like I got home just long enough to quarantine and then pack my bags and get things in a truck to get shipped over here, like the things that I was going to keep, and trying to get rid of a bunch of other stuff that I didn't need. Did some downsizing for sure. But also, it sucked. I got to see a handful of friends who I trusted to see and trusted were quarantined. But like, in general, I didn't see anyone before I left.
Oh yeah.
And so like, I went out there, bam, it was quick, and then I was out here. And like, I'm doing better now, but like, this whole experience definitely took a mental toll.
Oh, I bet.
I didn't really get to do a come home experience, and like that last trip was pretty intense.
Yeah.
It was like not. It's weird to explain this to people. Like, not that I've ever seen. I've only been around like errant bombings. I was never around any of the real intense stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen footage of the intense stuff, and I've been in situations that were kind of like galling, but those aren't the things that really bother me.
Yeah, same for me.
Yeah, and I don't think that, like, the things that really bothered me out there were like, it was always like the refugees, people who lost their homes. Those are the things that bother you. It's not the destruction. It's the look in people's eyes.
The story that always got to me, like Mosul operation. Yeah, you would see everything that you can see, but the thing that always got to me was like, we were I just finished up a hard day in the old city, and it was me and my fixer, and we were heading back, got in his Helix, and we saw this like old woman just bawling her eyes out. And so she was like, I'm trying to get home on the east side of Mosul. It was like, this was she hasn't seen her family since 2014, hasn't seen her son, because they lived in Old City, so they were stuck there for, 3 close to 4 years, and hasn't seen their family that was on the east side. They were able to escape and go back on the east side when it got liberated. And so we drove her to her oldest son's house, and we were there, and she saw her son for the first time in 4 years since ISIS. And so in seeing that, it was just like, oh my gosh, I don't think I even took a photo of it. I didn't do anything. And she gave me like her husband didn't make it. So like her husband died on the way getting out of the city, escaping. And so those stories, and she was like so grateful to me. I didn't do anything. She like gave me like 2 of her rings. And I was like, no, I don't need it. Like, I don't need your jewelry. It's like, and she wanted something from me the whole time. And like, I didn't have anything. So I had like a come and take it San Antonio Velcro patch. And she was like, I want that. I'm like, okay. And so I took it out and handed it to her, and she gave me her jewelry. She was so persistent. She wanted something to remember by. And I was like, I didn't do it. Like, the fixer was the one that did anything, because he's like awesome. But those are the stories that, that are a lot harder than like gunfire or, dead ISIS bodies on the ground and stuff like that. So it's so sad, those really intense stories, those where you just sit and listen to people, and you're just like, oh, it's hard to grasp.
Definitely going back to Syria after. So I was there just like when things were kicking up for the invasion,
mm-hmm.
and and just after, and again, like I missed the intense stuff, but like that's not like, it's not a contest. Like, you're there or you're not when that stuff happens. But it was the way the mood changed in that entire region just stuck with me, because when I was there the first time, they were nervous about what Turkey might do. They were nervous about these things.
Oh, yeah.
This was still, they still felt triumphant. ISIS is really feels like it's on the run. Like, they're still out there, and we still need to fight them. But we really crushed it. They're not. It's just not like, they're just not what they were. And, we feel triumphant, and, they were also just so pro-American, like your military helped make this happen.
Wow.
We love you. You liberated Kobani. Like, we couldn't have done it without you. Like that's a very great thing. And like one of the guys I talked to, he's like, what we need out here? KFC. He's not joking.
Dude, KFC I had KFC in Palestine before, and it was freaking good.
Yeah, they don't realize that actually their KFC is better than ours.
Way better. McDonald's overseas is way better. Like,
so much better. But anyway, but like that, and it just really struck me when I went back afterwards, because all of that was like, why did the Americans leave, and like how is this happening? Why is this happening?
Tough.
Can you talk to President Trump and tell, like, as I thought, like important, like reporters are important people, and a lot of them didn't really. a lot of them knew that wasn't the case.
Yeah, right.
But it was hard talking to them. It was hard knowing that what they'd been through. It was hard seeing because this was still something that was happening to them in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And just like, how could this happen? And also because some of these people had already been driven from their homes once by ISIS and gotten to go back home. Like they're like, we won.
Like we're here. Yeah.
Like because that was, I think, the thing that was really hard for them, because they like we had won. We were rebuilding. Things were coming back. We thought that the worst was behind us, and it's just it's happening all over again. And just hearing them talk about that and how afraid they were. And I think, like with the pandemic, some of the things that really stuck with me was, I mean, I was able to finally get out because, like, Kurds helped me. Kurds helped me get out of there. Like driving me back to my apartment so I could get my things. My friend out there that I was staying with was a Westerner, but her roommate was Kurdish, or one of them. And I remember talking to him right before I left, and he told me about his experience. He'd been fed pole for a while. Oh yeah, I was with him for quite a bit. He had been fed pole kind of in the earlier days of the war when Kurds were still like doing that. That doesn't happen as much anymore. But when there were still a lot of like a lot of those guys ended up becoming Zaravani later, and I think he did too. But he told me about being in Baghdad, and he's just like, yeah, like I eventually had to get out of there because I just kept getting shot. And not like shot at, like showed me like, yeah, I got shot in the head, and like there's like a shoulder. No, he got like he showed me like this like kind of mark, and you could see it still on his head. Like, yeah, I got shot in the head. Like I got shot in the head. I got shot in the leg. I still feel the one on the leg. Jesus. And he was doing like I was talking about that. He's just like, I'm really worried that the Americans are going to leave Erbil, and they can't. We can't survive without them. Yeah, and it would be bad news. And I'm like, I just kind of sat there and just like, it's not my place to say one way or the other. I'm like, I'm a journalist. I don't make policy. But he just kind of said that. And I'm just like, I don't know. And I felt bad for leaving. And ironically, his wife was in Texas at the time. So she was stuck there. And wow. He actually, he gave me, I guess I was able to do something nice. He gave me a package to mail to her. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's pretty common. Yeah, I usually can't leave. I can't go or come back without some kind of bringing something, whether it's like chocolate or bringing like a whole bunch of packages to mail people. Oh my God. I was a little bit disappointed that I was going to get, because I had plans after the embed to, because I do some R&R. Yeah. Oh yeah, I was gonna go to the Citadel and like get a bunch of stuff for people at home. Yeah. Because the Citadel was closed. Golly. The whole thing was closed. I saw pictures of the Citadel during the day, empty, day or night. Like to see that area of Erbil empty. Never. See no there. It was wild. It was just the moving experience was weird. It was it was a lot of. And it has been also the change of pace. I had some clashes with my editors that I'll admit were largely my own fault. They've been more or less patient with me. They also realize that I've been moving here in an unusual situation. I don't get to go out and develop sources the way that I normally would, because I'm so dependent right now on social media and like online channels to find and connect with people, like a lot of us are. I think that's again a state of journalism. I think that there's a long conversation that we don't have time for on all of this, but I think we blame social media sometimes for bad behavior that I don't think is entirely the fault of social media. Yeah, I agree. I think we are blaming social media too much for a lot of stuff, but there are problems with our relationship with social media, and I think news media's relationship with social media is not good right now, because I think we are finding too many of our sources and too many of the people that we're finding by finding people who are outspoken on social media, who do not always have opinions that represent what people actually believe. Yeah. I don't, because the times that I've gotten to interact with like normal people out here, because I think in the context of my job, I interact so much with the people who email us the most and who are most vocal on social media. Those are people with strong opinions, and that's not a bad thing, but and sometimes they can be rough to deal with, and they have strong opinions about what I've written or how I do things. It's been nice every once in a while to like go out and do something where like even just like cashiers, or like the time that I had to get rid of my neighbor's couch. I thought I was going to take my neighbor's couch, but then there wasn't room for it in here, so I had to get rid of it for free. And this nice family came and got it. Super local family. It was cool interacting with them because they were just like, normal people. I haven't gotten as much normal people interaction as I want to, and also in being in this community and getting to know it. I would kill to go to a dive bar right now and talk to people who don't actually read the news all that much, because
that's one of my favorite things in living in the countryside of Texas. Like I have these awesome hill country dive bars, man. They're so great. And you just sit at the bar and you just have, fun conversations, and that's like my favorite thing living out here.
But I mean, that's something that I've found. It's also been weird sometimes where I would run into the most wild thing, like in between trips. I ran into in the wild, like a super fan of War is Boring. This was after I had left, and like all the guys that I had worked with had left. And he didn't know me super, but like we were talking about it. I was like you used to work for War is Boring. He's like, I'm a big fan of like Joe Trevithick and Matthew Gault. I'm like, I know very, very well. I've held Joe's daughter, and like, I know them very well. It's you never know who you're gonna meet, but yeah, we need to find. Online helps us stay connected with people, but it can also create silos, and we just break out of it. I think right now with the pandemic, we're really reliant on it because I hate how much I'm using it right now, but there's just no other way. And the one I'm definitely gonna, at least for a week after I get the vaccine, just not, or whenever we're allowed to like go out and do things.
Yeah,
I'm definitely gonna take a social media hiatus for I don't know how long, but it's a weird thing.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for being on here for 3 hours. I always wanted to do a 3-hour podcast. Like that was always my goal. I wanted to see how Joe Rogan does it, 3 or 4 times a week. But it's easy when someone you're very smart, you have awesome stories, and I really appreciate it. And we have to do this again, man.
It's also not as late here as it is for you.
Oh, I'm a night owl, man. After this, I'll probably. I like the video game Warzone, so I'll play with like a whole bunch of my international friends if they have internet, or I'll play with this old buddies, and like we just catch up with people, kind of like through it. And so they're probably on. They're probably been texting. I have my phone off, and I probably I have a whole bunch of like text messages like, we need a fourth player. Where are you at?